Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Isaac Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger in these Virginia mountains for 17 years. What I'm about to tell you happened in Jefferson National Forest, fall of '87. I've shared this with maybe 3 people in my whole life. Each time, they looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I have, but I've got the reports, the photos, even hair samples that never made it into any official file. I work the backcountry, the deep woods where cell phones don't reach and the nearest road is a day's hike away. Most folks don't realize how wild these Appalachian mountains still are. You can walk for 20 miles and not see another human soul. That's how I like it. Or used to, anyway. The incident happened near Raven's Ridge, up in a hollow between Devil's Backbone and the old Cassidy homestead. Elevation, about 3,200 feet. It's a place where the trees grow too close together and the shadows fall wrong even at noon. I'd been through there plenty of times over the years, tracking lost hikers or checking on hunting camps. Always gave me the creeps, but I figured that was just mountain superstition talking. See, I grew up hearing stories about hollow folk. Families that went into the deep mountains during hard times and came back different, changed. My grandmother used to say they weren't quite human anymore. I always thought it was just old mountain talk, stories to keep kids from wandering too far from home. I was 41 that October. Old enough to know better than to believe in ghost stories. Lost my wife Sarah to cancer 2 years before, and I guess I'd gotten comfortable with being alone in the woods. They were quieter than the empty house back in town. Sarah used to worry about me working alone up there. Turns out she was right to worry, just not about the things she thought. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 bow hunters from Richmond had missed their check-in. Their names were Marcus Webb, Tom Bradley, and Jim Carson. All veterans, all experienced outdoorsmen who knew these woods almost as well as I did. They'd gotten permits to hunt the area around Raven's Ridge, which should have been my first warning sign. Local folks avoid that hollow, especially during hunting season. I found their truck on the old logging road, doors wide open like they'd left in a hurry. Fresh blood on the seats, but no drag marks, no signs of a struggle. Just blood and emptiness. Their gear was still there. Expensive compound bows, rangefinders, all the high-tech stuff city hunters bring. But the men were gone. I radioed base camp, but the signal was weak. These deep hollows are dead zones for radio waves, something about the way the mountains fold in on themselves. I was on my own until backup could hike in, which would be at least 8 hours. By then, if these men were hurt and bleeding somewhere, it might be too late. I checked the hunter registration forms. They'd planned to set up camp near the old Cassidy place and work the ridges above the hollow for white-tailed deer. Simple enough plan. I knew the area like the back of my hand. Should have been an easy search and rescue. The morning air was crisp, maybe 40 degrees, with that sharp smell of early frost. October in the mountains is beautiful. All those red and gold leaves, the way the light cuts through the morning mist. It was the kind of day that makes you forget why anyone would want to live anywhere else. I shouldered my pack and headed up the trail. Standard kit, first aid supplies, emergency shelter, enough food and water for 2 days, my Motorola radio, a Silva compass, maglite flashlight, and my service revolver. I'd found 127 missing persons in these mountains over the years, some alive, some dead, but I always found something. This case felt different from the start, though I couldn't say why. The trail to the old homestead follows Bear Wallow Creek up through stands of hemlock and rhododendron. It's an easy walk for the first mile, then it gets steep. The hollow itself sits in a natural bowl between 2 ridges, protected from wind but also from sunlight for most of the day. The Cassidy family had built their cabin there in the 1892, back when people still homesteaded these remote places. As I got closer to the hollow, I noticed the quiet. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no insects buzzing. Just the sound of my boots on the trail and the distant murmur of the creek. Even the wind seemed to stop at the edge of the hollow. I found the hunter's camp right where I expected, in a clearing about 100 yards from the old cabin foundation. But what I saw there made me stop in my tracks. The camp was set up perfectly. Too perfectly. 3 sleeping bags arranged in a precise triangle around a cold fire pit, cooking gear clean and organized. Coffee pot sitting on the grill with coffee still in it, and it was still warm. That was impossible. The hunters had been missing for over 24 hours. I touched the side of the pot with the back of my hand. Warm, but not hot, like someone had just taken it off the fire maybe an hour ago. But there were no fresh ashes in the pit, no heat radiating from the stones. The fire had been cold for hours, maybe longer. I called out, "Hello, Park Service." My voice echoed off the ridges and died in the trees. No answer. I started walking the perimeter of the camp, looking for tracks. The ground was soft from recent rain, perfect for holding prints. I found boot tracks leading away from camp toward the old cabin ruins, but they were strange. They started out normal, size 11 Danner boots, typical hunter footwear. But as I followed them, the tracks seemed to change. The heel marks got shallower, the toe impressions deeper and longer, like the person wearing the boots was stretching. At the old cabin site, I found the hunters' rifles. All 3 of them, expensive compound bows, just laid out in a triangle around an old stone well. No hunter leaves his weapon behind, not voluntarily. These weren't just dropped, they were arranged, positioned with careful precision. I knelt down to examine the well. It was old, hand-dug stone, probably from when the Cassidys first settled here. The opening was about 3 feet across, covered by rotting wooden planks. I shined my flashlight down into the darkness. The light seemed to get swallowed up. I couldn't see the bottom. That's when I heard the voice. Isaac, clear as day, calling my name. A woman's voice, familiar and warm. I stood up fast, hand moving to my sidearm without thinking. "Hello?" I called. "Who's there?" Silence, just the soft whisper of wind through the trees. I walked back toward the camp, checking every tree, every shadow. Nothing. But I could feel eyes on me, that prickly sensation you get when you know you're being watched. My radio crackled with static. I tried to raise base camp, but got nothing but white noise. The needle on my compass was spinning slowly, like it couldn't decide which way was north. I decided to set up my own camp and wait for backup. Standard procedure when you're dealing with missing persons, be all. Establish a base and work outward in a grid pattern. But as I unrolled my sleeping bag, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The missing hunter's sleeping bags were arranged in the exact same pattern as the rifles around the well. A perfect triangle, each bag the same distance from the center point. I took out my measuring tape. Each bag was exactly 6 feet from the cold fire pit. No one camps that precisely. It's not natural. As evening came on, the temperature dropped fast. Mountain weather can change in minutes, and I could see my breath in the air. I built up my fire and heated some coffee, trying to think through what I'd found. 3 experienced hunters, all military veterans, don't just vanish. They especially don't leave their weapons behind in some kind of ritual pattern. And they definitely don't leave warm coffee sitting around for 24 hours. I was studying the photos I'd taken of the boot tracks when I heard it again. Isaac, closer this time, right at the edge of my firelight. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the tree line. Nothing but dark trunks and hanging branches. But the voice had been clear, distinct. A woman's voice that I almost recognized. "Park Service," I shouted. "If someone's out there, show yourself." The echo came back from the ridges. "Show yourself, yourself, self." I checked my sidearm, made sure it was loaded. 17 years in these mountains, and I'd never drawn my weapon on anything more dangerous than a sick raccoon. But my hand was shaking as I held the flashlight. The fire popped and settled, sending up a shower of sparks. In the brief flare of light, I saw something that made my heart stop. A face in the trees, white and gaunt, watching me from about 50 feet away. I swung the flashlight toward it, but the beam caught only empty forest. Whatever I'd seen, if I'd seen anything, was gone. I sat back down by the fire, but I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound in the forest, the hoot of an owl, the crack of a settling tree, made me jump. Just before dawn, I heard footsteps circling my camp. Slow, deliberate steps in the fallen leaves. I followed the sound with my flashlight, but the beam always seemed to be a few seconds behind. Whatever was walking out there stayed just beyond the light. When the sun finally came up, I found tracks all around my campsite. Bare footprints in the soft earth. Human-shaped, but wrong. The toes were too long, and they seemed to stretch toward the old well like the feet were reaching for something. I radioed for backup as soon as I could get a signal. My partner Dale Morrison said he'd hike in with a search dog. I told him to hurry. I had a feeling we were running out of time. Dale arrived around noon with Ranger, a German shepherd trained in search and rescue. The dog was good at his job. I'd seen him find lost hikers who'd been missing for days. But when we got within 100 yards of the old cabin site, Ranger started whining and pulling back on his leash. "What's wrong with him?" Dale asked. He was a good ranger, 10 years younger than me, originally from Ohio. He knew the mountains, but not like someone who'd grown up here. "Don't know," I said, but I was lying. I knew exactly what was wrong. The dog could sense what I was starting to feel, that this place was wrong in some deep, fundamental way. We tried to get Ranger to track the missing hunter's scent from their camp, but the dog wouldn't go near the old well. He'd get to about 20 feet away, then sit down and howl. A low, mournful sound that made my skin crawl. "Temperatures dropped 10 degrees since we got here," Dale said, checking his thermometer. "That's not normal for this time of day." He was right. Even with the sun directly overhead, the air in the hollow felt cold and damp. My breath misted when I exhaled. The shadows under the trees seemed darker than they should be. We split up to cover more ground. Dale took the eastern ridge, while I worked my way through the hollow toward Bear Wallow Creek. I'd gone maybe half a mile when I found the first piece of clothing, a red flannel shirt, hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet off the ground. It was clean, no tears or bloodstains, but it was arranged like a scarecrow. Arms spread wide, hanging there like someone had just stepped out of it. I called Dale on the radio. "Found something. Hunter's shirt in a tree. No sign of the owner. Copy that. I'm seeing something weird up here too. Boot prints that just stop. Middle of a rock face." I took photos of the shirt and kept moving downstream. A quarter mile later, I found pants, blue jeans hung on another tree, same height, same position. Then underwear. Then socks and boots. All arranged in a line leading toward the old cabin. It was like someone had gotten undressed as they walked, hanging each piece of clothing carefully on branches. But there was no body at the end of the trail. Just the stone well, with its rotting wooden cover. I was staring down into that dark hole when Dale's voice came crackling over the radio, distorted by static. "Isaac, you need to get up here. Now." I climbed the eastern ridge as fast as I could. Found Dale standing at the edge of a small clearing, his face white as paper. He was staring at something in the trees. "Look," he said, pointing with a shaking hand. There were 3 figures hanging in the hemlock trees. At first glance, they looked like the missing hunters. Same build, same hair color, same clothes, but something was wrong with the way they hung there. Their limbs were too long, stretched out like taffy, their heads tilted at impossible angles. "Are they dead?" Dale whispered. I raised my binoculars and focused on the closest figure. What I saw made me drop the glasses and step backward. The face looking back at me was Marcus Webb, one of the missing hunters. I'd seen his photo on the missing person report. Same square jaw, same dark beard, same brown eyes, but the expression was wrong. Too knowing, too hungry. And it was smiling at me. "We need to get out of here," I said. But when I turned around, Dale was gone. "Dale!" I shouted. "Dale!" No answer. I was alone on the ridge with 3 things that looked like men but moved like spiders hanging in the trees. I started back down toward the hollow, calling for my partner. My radio was dead, nothing but static no matter what frequency I tried. The compass needle spun freely, pointing in no particular direction. I found Dale at the old well, kneeling beside the stone rim. He was drinking from a tin cup, scooping water from the dark depths below. "Dale, what are you doing? Don't drink that water." He looked up at me, and I saw that his eyes had changed. They reflected light now, like an animal's. When he smiled, his teeth looked too sharp. "Water's good here, Isaac," he said in a voice that was almost his own. "Real good, cold and clean. Why don't you have some? We need to leave, now. There's something wrong with this place." Dale stood up slowly, water dripping from the cup in his hands. "Wrong? No, nothing's wrong here. Everything's just like it should be, just like it's always been." He spoke differently now, using words and phrases that sounded old-fashioned, like someone trying to remember how people used to talk. "The families," he said, still smiling that wrong smile. "They came here during the hard times, during the sickness and the dying times. They needed help, and the mountain helped them, fed them, kept them safe." "Dale, you're scaring me." "They had children here, lots of children, but the children got hungry. And when you're hungry long enough, you'll eat anything, even family." He took a step toward me, still holding the dripping cup. "But they didn't die, Isaac. They just changed, got hollow inside, empty, and now they need filling up again." I drew my revolver, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it steady. "Stay back, Dale." "That's not my name," he said, and his voice was completely different now. Older, like an old man talking through a young man's throat. "My name's Jeremiah Cassidy. Been living in this hollow since 1918, since the flu took my family and the mountain gave them back to me." The thing that looked like Dale dropped the cup. It hit the stone rim of the well and rang like a bell. In the echo, I heard other sounds, footsteps in the leaves, voices whispering in the trees, something large moving through the undergrowth. I was surrounded. "You can join us, Isaac," not Dale said. "Your Sarah's been asking for you. She's down below, waiting. She says she misses you something terrible." That's when I heard her voice again, clear and sweet and heartbreaking. "Isaac, honey, come down here with me. I'm so cold. I've been cold for so long." It was Sarah's voice, perfect in every detail. The way she used to call me in from the porch on winter evenings. The same tone, the same words she'd used when she was sick and needed me close. I knew it wasn't really her. Knew it couldn't be. But God help me, I wanted it to be. I took a step toward the well. The wooden planks covering the well had rotted away completely, leaving just a dark circle descending into the earth. As I got closer, I could see that the stone walls were carved with symbols, spirals and intersecting lines that hurt to look at directly. "That's right, not," Dale said encouragingly. "Just a little closer, she's been waiting so long." Sarah's voice drifted up from the depths. "Please, Isaac, I'm so tired of being alone." I was maybe 3 feet from the edge when my boot hit something metallic. I looked down and saw my grandfather's old compass, the one he'd given me before he died. It had fallen out of my pack somehow. The needle was pointing straight down into the well. That stopped me cold. Compasses point toward magnetic north, not toward holes in the ground. Unless there was something down there that was magnetically stronger than the Earth's own field. I bent down and picked up the compass. The moment my fingers touched it, Sarah's voice changed. "Isaac," she said, but now it sounded different. Layered. Like multiple people talking at the same time, trying to copy the same voice. "Isaac, come to us." "Us?" I said. The thing wearing Dale's face grinned, and I could see that its teeth went back much further than they should, row after row of sharp points. "All of us," it said. "Everyone who ever came to the hollow. Everyone who ever got hungry enough to make the trade." The whispers in the trees got louder. I could make out words now, fragments of conversation. "Hungry. So hungry. Feed us. Join us. Stay with us forever." I looked around and saw them emerging from the forest. Dozens of figures that might have been human once, but weren't anymore. Their limbs were stretched out like taffy, their skin pale and translucent. Some wore clothes from decades ago, Depression-era overalls, 1,940 seconds dresses, 1,960 seconds hunting gear. Others were naked, their bodies so thin I could see the shadows of their bones. But it was their faces that made me understand. Each one was a perfect copy of someone else. A collection of stolen identities, worn like masks by things that had forgotten what they originally looked like. "The Cassidy family," I whispered. Not Dale nodded. "We were the first, but not the last. Every few years, someone new comes to the hollow. Hunters, hikers, people running from their problems. We take their shapes, their voices, their memories, add them to the family." "What happened to the real Dale?" "He's still here," the thing said, and for just a moment, I heard Dale's real voice underneath the imitation. "Isaac, run." Then the false voice came back, stronger than before. "He's part of us now. Just like you're Sarah. Just like you're going to be." I raised my revolver and pointed it at not Dale's chest. "Where are the hunters?" "Right here," said a familiar voice behind me. I turned and saw Marcus Webb walking out of the trees. Same face from the missing person photo, same dark beard, but he moved wrong, like he was learning how to use his body. Been right here all along, said another voice. Tom Bradley emerged from the shadows on my left. His mouth moved normally, but the words seemed to come from somewhere else. Waiting for you to join us, said the third voice. Jim Carson stepped out from behind an old oak tree. All three hunters, present and accounted for, but their eyes were hollow, empty, like looking into the well. You see? Not, Dale said. Nobody really dies in the hollow, they just change. I was completely surrounded now, 20, 30 figures closing in from all sides. The air got colder with each step they took, and I could see my breath misting in front of my face. My grandfather's compass was still in my left hand. The needle was spinning wildly now, but every few seconds it would stop and point directly at one of the figures. Then it would spin again and point at another one. Magnetic anomalies, I whispered. You're not alive. You're some kind of recording. The false Sarah's voice came from the well. Does it matter, honey? I still love you. I still need you. No, I said louder. Sarah died. She died of cancer, and she's at peace. You're not her. The voice from the well changed, became angry. I am her. I have all her memories, all her love for you. What's the difference? The difference, I said, backing toward the well, is that she would never ask me to become a monster. I pulled the pin on one of my emergency flares and dropped it into the well. The red light fell for what seemed like forever before hitting bottom. In that brief illumination, I saw what was really down there. Bones. Thousands of them, arranged in careful patterns, and moving among them, pale things that looked like humans but crawled on all fours, their limbs bent at impossible angles. The real holofolk, the things that had been imitating human shapes for so long they'd forgotten what they really were. They screamed when the light hit them, a sound like wind through broken glass. All around me, the false humans flickered like bad television reception. For just a moment, I saw their true shapes. Elongated, translucent, with too many joints in their arms and legs. You can't leave, not Dale said, but its voice was breaking up, becoming static. No one leaves the hollow. I remembered something my grandfather had taught me about these mountains. About old Cherokee protections, ways to turn away evil spirits. I pulled the pouch of blessed tobacco from my pack, something I'd carried for years but never used, and started sprinkling it in a circle around myself. The creatures couldn't cross the line. They pressed against it like it was a physical barrier, their faces twisting with rage and hunger. Iron and salt and blessed tobacco, I said, remembering the old words. Protection of the grandfathers. But I couldn't stay in that circle forever. I had maybe one chance to get out of the hollow alive. I pulled out the rest of my emergency flares and the small demolition charges I carried for clearing rockfall. If I could collapse the well, maybe break whatever was keeping these things anchored to this place. Sarah wouldn't want this, I said to the darkness below. She'd want me to live. Then I lit all the charges at once and threw them into the well. The explosion shook the whole hollow. Ancient stone cracked and shifted, and I could hear water rushing far below, the underground spring that fed the well redirecting itself. The creatures around me flickered and faded like smoke, their stolen faces dissolving into nothing. Notdale grabbed for me as it disappeared, but its hand passed right through my arm. This isn't over, it whispered. We'll find another way. We always do. The ground started collapsing around the well. I ran as fast as I could, following Bear Wallow Creek toward the main trail. Behind me, I could hear the mountain eating itself, trees crashing down, rocks tumbling, the whole hollow sinking into the earth. I didn't stop running until I reached the old logging road where we'd left Dale's truck. Only then did I turn around and look back. Smoke was rising from the hollow, and the air smelled like sulfur and old bones. I could still hear voices in the wind, but they were faint now, like radio signals from very far away. I found Dale's body 3 hours later, about a mile from the collapsed well. He was lying next to the creek, looking peaceful, like he'd just laid down to rest. The coroner said he'd died of dehydration and exposure. No signs of violence, no obvious cause except that his body had just stopped. I never found the 3 hunters. The official report says they were caught in a rockfall when the old mine shaft collapsed. Their families got death certificates and insurance payouts. The area was declared geologically unstable and closed to the public indefinitely. I put in for a transfer the next week. Couldn't stand being alone in those deep woods anymore. They gave me a fire tower job up on Apple Orchard Mountain, where I could see for miles in every direction, where nothing could sneak up on me. But I kept monitoring the hollow from a distance. Started going through old Park Service files, newspaper archives, anything I could find about disappearances in these mountains. The pattern went back over 100 years. Every few years, people would vanish in that same area. Always hunters or hikers, always experienced outdoorsmen who should have known better. And sometimes other rangers would report strange things. Voices calling from abandoned cabins. Campers who seemed familiar but somehow wrong. Families hiking together who all had the same empty look in their eyes. 6 months after the incident, a new spring opened up in the hollow. I could see it from my fire tower, a thin stream of water that hadn't been there before. Within a year, people started reporting strange encounters again. Voices calling from the trees. Footprints that changed from human to something else. The hollow folk weren't gone, just waiting. I retired early, moved to town, tried to forget. But I keep track of the missing person reports from Jefferson National Forest. When someone goes missing near Ravens Ridge, I call in anonymous tips. Say, I saw suspicious activity near old mine shafts. Anything to keep the search parties away from that hollow. Because I know what's waiting down there. And I know that some hungers never really die. They just get passed down from one generation of monsters to the next. If you're planning to hike in the Virginia mountains, stay on the marked trails. Don't follow voices that call your name, especially if they sound like someone you've lost. And if you ever find yourself in a place where the birds don't sing and your compass spins like a carnival ride, turn around and walk away as fast as you can. Some places aren't meant for the living. The dead have been waiting there a long time, and they're very, very hungry. My name is Ezra Blackwood, and I've been a park ranger in Kentucky's Daniel Boone National Forest for 19 years. I've seen enough mountain madness to fill a dozen lifetime snake handlers, faith healers, treasure hunters looking for Confederate gold. Most folks think religion in these hills is all speaking in tongues and handling copperheads. They're not wrong, but they don't know the half of it. The summer of 1974 was the hottest anyone could remember. The creek beds were cracking like broken pottery, and even the rattlesnakes were looking for shade. I was based out of the Red River Gorge area, specializing in what the Park Service calls cultural resource protection. That's a fancy way of saying I keep vandals away from Indian burial sites and make sure treasure hunters don't blow up caves with dynamite. I wasn't always a ranger. Used to be, I was headed for the ministry, had 3 years of seminary under my belt before Vietnam changed my mind about God's plan. Came back from that war, knowing that if there was a God, he either didn't care about what happened to good people, or he had a real twisted sense of humor. Mountain religion felt like theater after that. Snake handling is just mountain madness, I used to tell folks. People getting worked up over nothing. That was before I found the Bone Church. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in August. Dr. Patricia Wells from the University of Kentucky was leading an archaeological team near Chimney Top Rock, about 30 miles from the nearest town. They'd been excavating what looked like Cherokee burial sites when they stopped answering their radio calls. That wasn't unusual. Reception was spotty in the deep valleys, but their research permit required daily check-ins. I loaded my truck with the usual gear: Motorola radio, Coleman lanterns, snakebite kit, and my Winchester rifle. The Forest Service doesn't like us carrying guns, but this far out, a ranger's got to be practical. These mountains don't forgive mistakes. The drive took 2 hours on logging roads that were more hope than highway. By the time I reached their base camp near Preacher's Creek, the sun was beating down like a hammer on an anvil. The camp was set up proper, 4 tents arranged in a square, equipment covered and stored, even the cook fire built in a stone circle. Professional work. But it was too quiet. I called out as I walked through the camp. "Dr. Wells? This is Ranger Blackwood." Nothing answered except the buzz of flies and the sound of water running over rocks. That should have been my first clue something was wrong. Preacher's Creek hadn't run water in 6 weeks. I found their excavation site about a 1/4 mile upstream. They'd been digging into what looked like a natural shelf of limestone. exposing what might have been graves. But the bones they'd uncovered weren't arranged like any Cherokee burial I'd ever seen. These bones were laid out in rows, like church pews, human bones, arranged in perfect lines under the earth. That's when I noticed the symbols carved into the trees around the dig site. Not Cherokee writing. I knew enough of that language from working with tribal representatives. These looked like Bible verses, but carved in a script I didn't recognize. Hebrew, maybe. The cuts in the bark were fresh, sap still weeping from the wounds. I knelt down beside the excavation and felt the ground vibrating under my knees, just barely, like a diesel engine running somewhere far underground. But there was nothing for miles that could make that kind of vibration. I put my ear to the dirt and heard something that made my blood run cold. Singing, hymns, faint as a whisper, coming from somewhere deep below. I stood up, fast, hand moving to my radio. The static that came back was wrong, not the usual white noise, but something that sounded almost like chanting. I tried 3 different frequencies, but they all gave me the same subsonic mumbling, like voices talking too low to understand. That's when I saw the creek water. It was running red, not muddy red from rainfall, because it hadn't rained in weeks. This was thick and dark, the color of old blood. I followed it upstream, trying to find the source, and discovered something that made my seminary training kick in, whether I wanted it to or not. The water was flowing uphill. I've lived in these mountains my whole life. I know how water works. But Preacher's Creek was running backward, carrying that red flow from somewhere deeper in the valley, defying everything I knew about gravity and sense. I should have left right then, should have hiked back to my truck and called for backup. Instead, I followed that impossible creek deeper into the valley, looking for Dr. Wells and her team, looking for an explanation that would let me sleep at night. The trees got thicker as I went, blocking out most of the sun even at midday. The symbols carved in the bark got more frequent too, covering every trunk like some kind of message written in a language that hurt to look at. My compass started spinning lazy circles, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees, even though the air felt thick as soup. That's when I heard the singing get louder. It was coming from up ahead, where the creek curved around a limestone cliff. Voices raised in harmony, singing an old hymn I recognized from my childhood, "Shall we gather at the river?" But there were too many voices, and they'd been singing too long. The sound had a dusty, hollow quality, like it was coming from very old throats. I rounded the bend and saw the entrance to what looked like a natural cave, carved wide and tall enough to drive a truck through. The Red Creek water flowed directly into it, disappearing into the dark. Above the entrance, someone had carved words in the limestone. "The Bone Church of the Serpent Saints, Est, 1890. And below that, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden." The singing was definitely coming from inside. I stood outside that cave entrance for 10 minutes, trying to talk myself out of going in. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to walk away, but 4 people were missing, and I was the only law enforcement for 50 miles. I had a job to do. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the cave. The tunnel sloped down at a gentle angle, carved smooth by centuries of water flow. The walls were covered in the same Hebrew-looking symbols I'd seen on the trees, but down here they'd been inlaid with something that glittered in my flashlight beam. When I looked closer, I realized it was snake scales, thousands of them, pressed into the rock to form letters and words. The singing got louder as I went deeper. I could make out more than one hymn now, different voices singing different songs, but somehow they all harmonized together like a choir that had been practicing for decades. The sound bounced off the cave walls until it seemed like it was coming from everywhere at once. About 100 yards in, the tunnel opened up into a chamber so big my flashlight couldn't find the far wall. But I could see enough to make my knees weak. It was laid out like a church. Rows and rows of stone benches carved from the living rock, all facing toward what looked like an altar at the far end. The benches were occupied. I counted at least 50 people sitting in perfect formation, their backs to me, swaying slightly as they sang. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes, long dresses for the women, dark suits for the men. Everything looked like it came from the 1890 seconds. I called out, "Dr. Wells, is that you?" The singing stopped. All at once, like someone had thrown a switch. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, slowly, every head in that underground church turned to look at me. Their faces were wrong. I can't explain it better than that. They looked human from a distance, but up close there was something off about the proportions. Eyes too large and too bright, reflecting my flashlight beam like an animal's. Skin that had a strange, mottled pattern to it. And when they opened their mouths to smile at me, their teeth were needle-sharp. "Welcome, brother," said a voice from the front of the congregation. "We've been waiting for you." I turned my flashlight toward the altar and saw him. He was tall and thin, wearing a black preacher's coat that hung on him like he'd lost a lot of weight since putting it on. His face was gaunt, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that were too bright in the dark. When he smiled, I saw that his tongue was forked. "I'm Brother Nehemiah," he said, his voice carrying perfectly in the chamber without him raising it. "And this is my congregation. We've been holding service for 84 years now." I backed toward the tunnel entrance, but found my way blocked by 4 people who'd moved behind me without making a sound. They were wearing modern clothes, jeans, t-shirts, hiking boots. I recognized one of them as Dr. Patricia Wells. But her skin had the same mottled pattern as the others, and her eyes reflected light like a snake's. "Ezra," she said, and her voice had a strange, hissing quality to it. "So good of you to join us. We were just discussing the theological implications of eternal service." "What happened to you?" I whispered. She smiled, and I saw the fangs. "I found faith, Ezra, real faith, the kind that transforms you completely." Brother Nehemiah stepped down from the altar, moving with an odd, fluid grace. "Your colleagues have joined our congregation, Ranger Blackwood. They've accepted the gift of serpent communion. They'll never hunger, never thirst, never die. They'll worship here forever, as God intended." The congregation started singing again, but this time I could see their mouths moving. Those needle teeth gleamed in my flashlight beam as they sang about gathering at the river. The sound was beautiful and terrible at the same time. "You used to be a man of God," Brother Nehemiah continued, walking closer. "I can smell the seminary on you. You lost your faith, didn't you? Let it slip away like water through your fingers." I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking. "Stay back." He laughed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Bullets won't help you here, brother. This is consecrated ground. Holy ground. The only weapon that matters here is faith." Behind me, Dr. Wells and her team started moving closer. I could hear the rustle of their clothes, but also something else, a dry, sliding sound like snakeskin against stone. "We can give you back what you lost," Brother Nehemiah said. "All it requires is surrender, one bite from our sacred serpents, and you'll understand everything. You'll feel God's love flowing through your veins like the sweetest poison." The congregation was standing now, still singing, but moving toward me with that same fluid motion. I counted dozens of them, all with those bright, reflecting eyes and needle teeth. Some looked like they'd been here since the 1,890 seconds. Others looked more recent. Dr. Wells and her team weren't the first modern people to find this place. I backed against the tunnel wall, rifle pointed at Brother Nehemiah. "Where are they? The rest of Dr. Wells' team?" "They're here," he said, gesturing toward the congregation. "Changed, perfected, made eternal through the blessing of venom." He smiled wider, and I saw that his jaw could unhinge like a snake's. "They chose transformation, just as you will." That's when I saw them. 3 more people in modern clothes scattered through the congregation, swaying and singing with the rest. But their skin had that same mottled pattern, and their eyes glowed in the dark. Dr. Wells's graduate students, transformed into something that wasn't quite human anymore. "The archaeological work continues," Dr. Wells said, stepping closer. "We're excavating the history of faith itself, learning how worship can literally change the human body when taken to its logical conclusion." Brother Nehemiah raised his arms, and the congregation fell silent. "Join us, Ezra Blackwood. Take back your faith. Let us show you what the Bible really means when it talks about being reborn." From somewhere in the darkness behind the altar, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. The dry rattle of snake tails, dozens of them, vibrating in unison, and underneath that, something worse, the sound of scales sliding across stone as something very large moved in the shadows. "The serpents are hungry," Brother Nehemiah whispered, "and they have so much wisdom to share." I ran, not proud of it, but when faced with 50 snake people in an underground church, running seemed like the smart choice. I bolted for the tunnel entrance, pushing past Dr. Wells and her transformed students. They didn't try to stop me, just smiled, those terrible smiles, and let me go. I made it halfway to the surface before I realized why. The tunnel was blocked. A solid wall of snakes filled the passage from floor to ceiling, copperheads, timber rattlers, coral snakes, and species I didn't recognize. They weren't moving, just hanging there like a living curtain, watching me with hundreds of bright eyes. Their rattles buzzed in harmony, creating a sound like an enormous engine. I backed away slowly, rifle ready, but the snakes just watched, waiting. "They won't hurt you," Brother Nehemiah's voice echoed up from the chamber below. "Not unless you refuse our invitation. The serpents know the faithful from the faithless." I had to find another way out. Using my flashlight, I searched the tunnel walls and found a narrow crack about shoulder high. It was barely wide enough for a person, but it angled upward. I squeezed through, scraping my shoulders raw against the limestone. The crack led to a smaller chamber filled with bones. Not just human bones, these had been arranged into furniture. Chairs made from rib cages, tables from skull foundations, even what looked like musical instruments carved from femurs. Everything was old, bleached white by time, but perfectly preserved in the dry cave air. In the center of the bone furniture sat a leather journal, so old the cover was cracking apart. I opened it carefully and read by flashlight. Asterisk. The Journal of Brother Nehemiah Crow, founder and pastor of the Serpent Saints. Year of our Lord, 1890. Asterisk. Asterisk. Today we begin our great work. The Lord has shown me in visions how true faith must be tested. Not with fire, as in the old days, but with venom. The serpent that tempted Eve in the garden carried divine wisdom in its bite. We shall embrace that wisdom completely. Asterisk. I flipped through pages of cramped handwriting, documenting the progressive transformation of an entire religious community. They'd started with regular snake handling, the kind you see in Pentecostal churches throughout Appalachia. But Brother Nehemiah had taken it further. Asterisk. The seventh day of serpent communion has brought revelations beyond my wildest hopes. Brother Samuel no longer needs to eat earthly food. Sister Mary speaks in the tongue of angels. My own flesh begins to change, becoming more perfect, more suited to God's work. Asterisk. Asterisk. The government men came today, asking questions about our missing neighbors. They don't understand that those neighbors chose transformation, chose to become something greater than mere humanity. I showed them our sacred chamber, and they ran like children. Soon they will return with soldiers. We must go deeper. Asterisk. The final entry was dated 3 months later. Asterisk. The transformation is complete. We no longer require sunlight or earthly sustenance. The serpents provide all we need through their sacred venom. We have achieved what the ancients only dreamed of, eternal life in service to the Most High. Our song of worship shall never end. Asterisk. I heard footsteps echoing through the crack I'd come through. Slow, deliberate steps getting closer. And that sliding sound again, like something large being dragged across stone. Ezra, Dr. Wells' voice called from the narrow passage. We know you're in there. Why are you fighting this? You studied theology. You know what this means. I looked around the bone chamber for another exit and found a hole in the floor partially hidden under a table made from skulls. Cold air was rising from it, which meant it led somewhere. I grabbed the journal and squeezed through. The hole dropped me into another tunnel, this one natural and unmade. Water dripped from stalactites overhead, and I could hear the sound of running water somewhere ahead. I followed the tunnel, hoping it led to the surface. Instead, it led to the source of the Red Creek water. The tunnel opened into a vast underground lake, its surface dark as oil. But it wasn't oil, it was blood, human blood, judging by the smell. At the center of the lake sat a stone island with a spring bubbling up from its center. The spring water was clear, but when it mixed with the lake water, it turned red. Around the edges of the lake, carved into the living rock, were hundreds of alcoves. Each one held a human body in various stages of decay, but they weren't quite dead. I could see them breathing slowly, their chests rising and falling in perfect unison. Their skin showed the same mottled patterns I'd seen on the congregation above. This was where they came to change. I waded into the lake. The water was warm and thick and made it halfway to the island before I heard the splashing behind me. Dr. Wells and her students had found the tunnel, but they weren't alone. Brother Nehemiah rose from the water like some kind of terrible baptism in reverse. His transformation was more complete than the others. His lower body had become serpentine, covered in scales that gleamed in my flashlight beam. He moved through the water with powerful undulations, cutting through the blood lake like a massive snake. "This is our baptismal font," he said, his voice carrying across the water. "Where the faithful are reborn in serpent's blood and venom. Join us, Ezra. Let go of your doubts and embrace divine transformation." I made it to the island and saw what was feeding the spring. Dozens of snakes were coiled around the base of the bubbling water source, their fangs extended into the flow. They were pumping venom directly into the spring, creating a mixture of poison and water that fed the entire underground system. 50 people were transformed in these waters, Brother Nehemiah said, sliding closer to the island. 50 people chose eternal life over mortal death. You can make it 51. Behind him, I could see Dr. Wells and her students moving through the water. But there were others now too, people in old-fashioned clothes, their skin completely scaled, moving like giant snakes through the bloody water. The original congregation, still alive after 84 years. I aimed my rifle at the spring mechanism, thinking maybe I could disrupt their poison supply. But Brother Nehemiah laughed. "Bullets are mortal weapons, Ezra. They can't harm those who have transcended flesh." He reached the island and began pulling himself onto the rocks with arms that had grown long and too flexible. But faith can. Faith can transform even the most stubborn soul. That's when I remembered something from my seminary days. Something about snake handlers and the verse they always quoted. "They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them." But there was another verse, one the snake handlers didn't like to talk about. I pulled out my pocket knife and cut my palm deep enough to draw blood. Then I spoke the words I remembered from the Gospel of Luke. "Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you." Brother Nehemiah stopped moving. The snakes around the spring began to writhe and hiss. Something in my voice, or maybe in my blood hitting the poisoned water, was disrupting whatever supernatural force held this place together. "You remember your scripture," he said, but his voice sounded less certain now. "But do you have faith to back it up?" I looked around at the dozens of people who had chosen transformation over humanity, at the poisoned spring that had been flowing for nearly a century, at the blood lake that fed the creek above, and I realized what I had to do. I had to destroy their source of power, even if it killed me. "Faith without works is dead," I said, and pulled the pins on both grenades from my emergency kit. Brother Nehemiah's eyes went wide as I held up the grenades. "You'll bring the whole cave system down," he hissed. "Everyone will die. Everyone already is dead," I said. "You just haven't figured that out yet." The transformed congregation was rushing toward the island from all sides now, moving through the blood lake with inhuman speed. But I had maybe 10 seconds before the grenades went off. I dove into the spring itself. The poison hit my system like liquid fire. Every nerve in my body screamed as the venom mixture flowed into my cuts and scrapes. But instead of the transformation Brother Nehemiah expected, something else happened. The poison burned through me and out again, carrying something with it. Something that had been holding this place together for 84 years. Brother Nehemiah shrieked not in anger, but in genuine terror. "You don't understand. Without the sacred spring, we'll all die. We'll age 84 years in minutes." The grenades exploded. The sound was enormous in the enclosed space. Chunks of limestone crashed into the blood lake, and the poisoned spring cracked apart like broken glass. The snakes that had been feeding venom into the water died instantly, their bodies going rigid. Then the aging started. Brother Nehemiah's perfect, preserved flesh began to wrinkle and spot. His serpentine lower body started to shrivel like a dried snake skin. The other transformed congregation members screamed as decades of postponed death caught up with them all at once. Dr. Wells and her students were closest to the island when it happened. I watched her mottled skin turn gray and papery, her bright eyes clouding over. "Ezra," she whispered as the transformation reversed itself, "what have you done?" "What should have been done 84 years ago," I said. The underground lake was draining through the cracks my grenades had opened. The bloody water was flowing away, revealing a floor covered in snake bones and human skeletons. Real skeletons, this time the remains of people who had died in this place over the past century. Brother Nehemiah was still alive, but barely. His serpentine body had withered to almost nothing, and his human torso looked like it belonged to a man of 140 years old. But his eyes still burned with fanatical fire. You've destroyed God's greatest miracle, he gasped. Eternal life. Through faith. That wasn't faith, I said, hauling myself out of the broken spring. That was just fear of death, taken to its logical extreme. The cave system was starting to collapse. Water was pouring in from above as the underground chambers flooded with normal creek water. I had to get out before the whole thing came down. But Brother Nehemiah grabbed my ankle with fingers that felt like twigs. "Join us," he wheezed. "Die with us. Be faithful to the end." I looked down at him, this man who had led 50 people into a century of unnatural life, who had convinced them that transformation was the same as salvation. And I felt something I hadn't felt since before Vietnam. Pity. "I'll pray for you," I said, and meant it. Then I kicked free and ran for the tunnel as the bone church of Preacher's Creek collapsed into the earth that had hidden it for so long. I made it to the surface just as the ground above the cave system caved in. The hole it left was perfectly round, about 50 feet across, and filled with rushing water as the creek resumed its normal course. Within hours, it looked like a natural sinkhole. Nothing to suggest the horror that had existed underneath. But I knew. And the journal I'd saved proved it. I sat by that new sinkhole until dark, watching the water level rise. Somewhere down there, the remains of the Serpent Saints were settling into the mud, along with Dr. Wells and her students, who had chosen transformation and found only death. When the state police finally arrived, I'd managed to get a radio signal once I was back on the surface. I told them there had been a cave-in during the archaeological expedition. Unstable limestone, weakened by the drought. 4 people dead, bodies unrecoverable. They believed me. It was easier than believing the truth. That was 30 years ago. I left the Park Service 6 months after the Bone Church incident. Couldn't stomach the idea of working in caves anymore, and every time someone mentioned snake handlers, I broke out in a cold sweat. The nightmares took 2 years to fade, and I still can't stand the sound of hymns sung in harmony. I went back to the ministry, if you can believe that. Not because I found my faith again. I'm still not sure what I believe about God. But I learned something important in that underground church. Faith isn't about certainty. It's about doubt, about questioning, about admitting you might be wrong. The snake handlers Brother Nehemiah led astray, forgot that part. They wanted certainty so badly they were willing to become monsters to get it. I pastor a small Methodist church now in Lexington. Nothing too dramatic, potluck dinners, charity drives, the occasional wedding or funeral. My sermons tend to focus on questions rather than answers, which some folks don't like. But I figure, if God wanted us to be certain about everything, He wouldn't have given us brains. I still have Brother Nehemiah's journal. Read it sometimes when I'm feeling too sure of myself. It's a reminder of what happens when faith becomes fanaticism, when the desire for eternal life overwhelms basic human decency. The government classified the area around Preacher's Creek as environmentally hazardous. Too many snake species in too small an area, they said. Potential for disease transmission. The whole valley is off limits now, marked with federal no trespassing signs. But sometimes hikers ignore the signs. And sometimes they don't come back. The missing persons reports started about 5 years after the cave-in. Always the same pattern, people camping near the sinkhole, drawn by stories of unusual snake populations. Their tents found intact but empty. No signs of struggle, just gone. I've gone back to check on the area a few times over the years. Unofficially, you understand. The sinkhole is still there, now covered with a layer of green algae that makes the water look almost normal. But if you know where to look, you can still see the symbols carved into the trees around it. Still fresh, sap still weeping from the cuts. And sometimes, if the wind is right and the water level is low, you can hear singing coming from somewhere underneath. Different voices now, newer voices. People who found the broken spring and thought they could rebuild what Brother Nehemiah started. The transformed congregation might be dead, but the idea of the Bone Church lives on. Faith corrupted into something hungry and patient, waiting for the next soul who wants certainty more than truth. Last month, a geology student from the University of Kentucky went missing near Preacher's Creek. They found his equipment by the sinkhole, along with a notebook full of sketches showing Hebrew letters carved into limestone. The final entry read, "Found evidence of underground chambers. going to investigate. This could change everything. I know that student is still alive down there, in whatever remains of the Bone Church, changed, but alive, singing hymns with voices that have forgotten what it means to be human. I should have sealed that place more thoroughly. Should have made sure nothing could survive. But 30 years ago, I was more concerned with getting out alive than making sure the evil stayed buried. That's on me, and someday I'll have to answer for it. If you're ever hiking in the Red River Gorge area and you hear him singing coming from underground, do me a favor. Turn around, walk away. Don't investigate. Don't try to help. Don't let curiosity override common sense. Some congregations have been in service too long to welcome new members properly, and some kinds of faith are worse than no faith at all. The Bone Church is still taking converts, one soul at a time. Because if there's one thing Brother Nehemiah was right about, it's this: transformation is eternal, even when you wish it wasn't. My name is Samuel Brightfeather, and I've been a ranger in North Carolina's mountains for 14 years. People call me Sam. My Cherokee grandmother used to say I had good eyes for seeing what didn't belong. She was right, but I wish she'd been wrong. It was September 1982, right when the leaves start turning. The mountains were packed with tourists coming to see the colors. I worked the Blue Ridge Parkway sector, way up near Grandfather Mountain. Beautiful country, but lonely. Cell phones weren't a thing yet, and radio signals got swallowed up by all those peaks and valleys. I had a college degree in anthropology and spoke Cherokee pretty well. The Park Service used me as their go-between with the tribal elders. I knew every story, every legend these mountains held. That's why what happened later made no sense at all. See, skinwalkers are from the Southwest, Navajo country. They don't belong in Appalachian hills, any more than a cactus belongs in a pine forest. Cherokee stories talk about other things, spirits and little people and such, but not creatures that steal your skin and wear it like clothes. But something was out there doing exactly that. The first weird report came in on a Tuesday morning. I was drinking coffee at the ranger station when Mary Chen called. She was hiking the Appalachian Trail with her husband Bob. "There's something wrong," she said, voice shaky over the crackling radio. "We just saw Bob's brother Tommy at Rough Ridge Shelter. But Tommy died in a car wreck 3 months ago." I grabbed my notepad. People see all sorts of things in the mountains when they're tired and spooked. "Ma'am, you sure it was him? Sometimes strangers can look familiar when you're—" "It was Tommy," Bob's voice cut in, rough and certain. "He knew about the fishing trip we took as kids, knew about the scar on my knee, even called me Bobby Boy like he always did." "Where's this person now?" "Gone. Just walked into the woods when we started asking questions. I told them to stay put and headed up there. Rough Ridge sits at about 4,000 feet, a good hour's climb from the parking area. The shelter there is just a 3-sided wooden building with a tin roof, but it keeps hikers dry. When I got there, Bob and Mary looked like they'd seen a ghost. Which, I guess, they had. Bob was a solid guy, maybe 45, with work-rough hands and honest eyes. Not the type to make things up. He showed me exactly where they'd seen Tommy, standing right by the fire ring, cooking something in a little pot. "He looked perfect," Bob said. "Same clothes Tommy always wore. Same way of standing with one hip cocked. But when he smiled..." Bob shuddered. Something was off about that smile. Too wide. Too many teeth showing. I looked around the campsite. Found fresh boot prints in the soft dirt, size 10 or 11. They headed into the rhododendron thickets where the trail got lost in a maze of twisted branches and shadows. "You folks know anyone else who might know those childhood stories? Someone playing a joke, maybe?" Mary shook her head. "Tommy was Bob's half-brother. Different dads. The fishing trip Bob mentioned, only the 3 of us knew about it. Bob, Tommy, and Bob's father. And his father's been dead for 8 years. That gave me a chill I couldn't shake. I radioed headquarters and requested backup for a wellness check. Could be someone having a mental health crisis, wandering around confused. It happens sometimes. While we waited, I walked the area looking for more signs. The boot prints were clear at first, but got weird as they went deeper into the woods. About 50 yards in, they changed. Same depth, same pace, but suddenly a different tread pattern, like the person had stopped and put on completely different boots. That's when I noticed the birds had gone quiet. Not normal mountain quiet, dead quiet. Even the insects had stopped buzzing. The only sound was wind moving through the leaves, and it sounded wrong somehow, like whispers. I've spent half my life in these mountains, and they'd never felt hostile before. But standing there, in that unnatural silence, following impossible footprints, I felt like I was being watched by something that didn't want me there. Something that wasn't quite human. State Trooper Lisa Martinez showed up around noon with her partner Jake Thompson. Lisa was sharp, 5 years on mountain patrol, knew the area almost as well as I did. Jake was newer, maybe 2 years in, but solid. We took statements from Bob and Mary, then followed the trail into the woods. The boot prints kept changing every few hundred yards. Size 10 became size 12, then size 8. The tread patterns shifted from work boots to sneakers to hiking boots. Either this guy's got a whole closet of shoes in his backpack, Jake said, or we're following more than one person. Tracks don't overlap, though, Lisa pointed out. It's like one person just kept changing feet. That's when we found the first skin. It was hanging on a wooden frame about 8 feet off the ground, stretched between 4 trees like some kind of horrible laundry. At first glance, it looked like a deer hide. But the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too narrow, too human. Jesus Christ, Jake whispered. The skin was pale and perfect, without any tears or holes. No face, though. That part had been cut away clean. But I could see where arms and legs had been, still holding their shape like a person had just stepped out of it. Lisa got on the radio to call in the crime scene team. While she talked, I looked closer at the frame. The wood was fresh-cut oak, joined with traditional Cherokee woodworking techniques. Whoever made this knew the old ways. Jake was standing too close, staring at the skin like it hypnotized him. Step back from that, I told him. He didn't move, didn't even blink. Jake, when he finally turned around, his eyes looked different, darker, and when he smiled, it was too wide, showing too many teeth. You okay, partner? Lisa asked, clicking off her radio. Fine, Jake said, but his voice had a weird echo to it, like he was talking from inside a cave. Just thinking about my grandmother's stories. She used to tell me about the NVI, YVWI. I went cold. Jake Thompson was from Virginia, born and raised. No Cherokee blood, and definitely no grandmother who spoke Cherokee. But NVI YVWI was exactly the right term for what we were looking at. What does that mean? Lisa asked. Beings that steal appearance to escape death, I said, not taking my eyes off Jake. Where'd you learn that phrase, Thompson? His smile got wider. Oh, you know how it is, Sam. Sometimes the old knowledge just comes to you when you need it. He knew my nickname. I'd never told him to call me Sam. Lisa sensed something wrong, too. Her hand drifted toward her gun without her even realizing it. Jake, you feeling all right? You look a little pale. Never felt better. He stretched like a cat, joints popping in ways that didn't sound right. This mountain air really agrees with me. Makes me feel like a new person. A new person. The skin on the frame swayed in the breeze, and I realized it was the exact same height as Jake. Lisa, I said quietly, we need to leave, now. But Jake was already moving, not toward us, away, deeper into the woods. He walked wrong, though, like someone learning how to use legs for the first time. Too much bend in the knees. Too much sway in the hips. Thompson, get back here, Lisa shouted. He stopped and turned around. In the shadows between the trees, his face looked like it was shifting. Features sliding around like clay before hardening back into Jake's familiar face. Sorry, partner. Got to go home now. Family's waiting. Then he was gone, disappeared into the rhododendron thickets like smoke. Lisa ran after him, but I grabbed her arm. Don't. That's not Jake anymore. What the hell are you talking about? Jake Thompson doesn't have a Cherokee grandmother. He's Lutheran, from Richmond. Parents are both accountants. I read his file when he transferred in. Lisa stared at me, then looked back at the woods where Jake had vanished. Then who was that? Before I could answer, we heard Jake's voice coming from 3 different directions at once, all calling Lisa's name. But Jake, the real Jake, was somewhere else entirely. Had to be. We're leaving, I said, right now. As we backed toward the trail, I caught a glimpse of movement in the trees. Someone was watching us from behind every trunk, but when I looked directly, nobody was there. The skin on the frame was gone too, just empty air where it had been hanging. And somewhere in the distance, Jake's voice was laughing with too many mouths. We found the real Jake Thompson 20 minutes later, face down in Price Lake, with the back of his skull caved in. He'd been dead for at least 6 hours, maybe more. The medical examiner said later that someone had skinned him carefully, starting from the back, where the cuts wouldn't show if he was standing upright. Lisa threw up in the bushes. I wanted to, but I'd seen worse things during my army days. Still, this was different. This felt personal and wrong in ways that went beyond murder. The thing wearing Jake's face had known details about me that only someone with access to personnel files could know. It had spoken Cherokee with perfect pronunciation, and it had moved like something that wasn't quite comfortable in human skin yet. "We need more backup," Lisa said, wiping her mouth with a shaky hand. I shook my head. "We need to keep this quiet until we understand what we're dealing with. If word gets out that something's killing and skinning people, we'll have panic. And panic up here gets people hurt worse than whatever's hunting them." "You think there's more than one?" "I think there's been more than one for a long time." That evening, I drove down to Cherokee to talk with Mary Crow Dog. She was 83 years old and knew more about the old ways than anyone else still breathing. Her cabin sat in a hollow about 5 miles from the main reservation, surrounded by gardens where she grew traditional medicines. Mary was sitting on her porch when I pulled up, like she'd been waiting for me. She probably had been. Old Cherokee women always seemed to know when trouble was coming. "You look scared, Sam Brightfeather," she said in Cherokee. "What's hunting you?" I told her everything. The skin on the frame, the thing wearing Jake's face, the impossible footprints. She listened without interrupting, rocking slowly in her chair. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Navii vivoi," she finally said, "but not the old ones. These are new. Made from Cherokee who died on the Trail of Tears but refused to accept death. That was 150 years ago. Death doesn't follow white man's calendar." She got up and went inside, came back with a leather pouch and a bundle of sage. "Your people, we were forced from these mountains in 1838. Many died on the walk to Oklahoma. But some spirits never left. They've been hiding in the deep places, stealing faces to keep existing. Why now? Why are they showing themselves?" Mary handed me the leather pouch. Inside were small carved pieces of bone and stone. Developments pushing into their territory. New roads, new trails. They're running out of places to hide. How do I stop them? You don't stop them, grandson. You help them find peace. They're still Cherokee, just lost and scared. They need someone to show them the way home. I drove back up the mountain with Mary's words echoing in my head. The radio crackled as I reached the ranger station. Multiple reports coming in, hikers on different parts of the trail, all claiming to have encountered family members who shouldn't be there. A woman from Ohio saw her dead husband at the Tannahaw Trail overlook. A college kid from Tennessee ran into his grandfather, who'd been buried 5 years ago. Each encounter was the same: perfect physical appearance, complete memories, but something wrong with the behavior that made people run. Lisa met me at the station, looking haggard. "I've got 17 witness reports so far. And Sam, I found something." She led me to her patrol car and opened the trunk. Inside was a wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, carved with Cherokee symbols I recognized from my grandmother's stories. "Found it at the lake, where we discovered Jake's body. There's more." She opened the box. Inside were folded papers, covered with names written in Cherokee syllabary. Dozens of names, maybe hundreds. At the bottom of each page was a date, all from 1838. "It's a roll," I said, "a list of people who died on the Trail of Tears. Look at the last page." The final sheet was different. Recent names written in English. Jake Thompson was there, along with 6 others I didn't recognize. At the bottom, in fresh ink, someone had added another name. Samuel Brightfeather. My hands started shaking. The NVIVVI weren't just stealing random faces anymore. They were building a collection. And they wanted mine. "There's something else. It's Ender," Lisa said. I called the addresses of the other English names. Every single one is a person who's gone missing in these mountains over the past 10 years. All of them were found dead, apparently from accidents or animal attacks. But they were skinned. Yeah. And according to this list, they're all still walking around somewhere. As if summoned by our conversation, familiar voices started calling from the woods around the station. I heard my grandmother's voice, sweet and patient like when she used to tell me stories. Lisa's father called her name from 3 different directions. But my grandmother had been dead for 15 years, and Lisa's father was in Florida watching his retirement TV shows. The NVI-YVY were coming for us, and they were wearing the faces of everyone we'd ever loved. They came just after midnight. I was barricaded in the ranger station with Lisa, both of us armed, but knowing bullets wouldn't help much against spirits wearing stolen skin. We'd reinforced the doors and windows, but that felt like trying to keep out smoke with screen doors. My grandmother walked out of the forest first, looking exactly like she had at my high school graduation. She wore the blue dress with tiny flowers that she'd been buried in, and her silver hair was braided with the red ribbons I'd given her. "Sammy," she called in Cherokee, using the pet name only she ever used. "Why are you hiding from your family?" Behind her came Lisa's father, her brother who died in Iraq, and her daughter who'd been stillborn 3 years ago. All perfect. All wrong. "Don't listen to them," I told Lisa, but she was already crying. "That's really Emily," she whispered. "Look at her hands. The little birthmark on her thumb." How could they know about that? The figures pressed against the windows, faces familiar and loved and terrible. They spoke with voices we remembered, told stories only they should know, begged us to come outside and be with family again. My dead father appeared, still wearing his army dress uniform from the funeral. He looked at me with eyes full of disappointment. "You always were too stubborn, son, just like your mother said." That's when I realized they weren't just wearing stolen faces. They had absorbed everything: memories, personality, relationships. These things knew us better than we knew ourselves, because they'd consumed the people who'd made us who we are. "Sam," Lisa said, "I can't tell the difference anymore. What if that really is my daughter? It's not, but what if it is? What if I'm wrong and I'm keeping her out in the cold?" The NVI-YVY were patient. They'd had 150 years to learn how to hurt people in ways bullets couldn't fix. They knew exactly which faces to wear, which voices to use, which memories to invoke. I pulled out the leather pouch Mary Crow Dog had given me and scattered the carved bones on the floor. They arranged themselves in a pattern I recognized, a traditional Cherokee protection circle. The voices outside changed immediately. My grandmother's sweet tone turned angry. "You can't hide behind the old ways forever, Sammy. We are the old ways now." "No," I said, standing in the center of the circle. "You're just afraid to die." The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later. But in that moment of darkness, things moved. When I could see again, the figures were inside the station. All of them, standing in a circle around us, like some horrible family reunion. "We've been waiting so long," my grandmother said. "Living in caves and cold places, wearing the faces of strangers, but you could give us belonging again. Cherokee faces for Cherokee spirits." Lisa's stillborn daughter reached out with tiny fingers. "Mama, why won't you hold me?" "Because you're not Emily," Lisa said through tears. "Emily never got to be 3 years old. She never got to talk or walk or call me Mama." The thing wearing Emily's face smiled with too many teeth. "I could be what she would have been. All you have to do is let me." That's when I understood. The NVI-YVY weren't just stealing identities, they were offering impossible gifts. Chances to be with lost loved ones again, to heal relationships that death had broken. "They're offering us what we want most," I told Lisa. "But the price is everything we are." My father stepped closer. "The price is joining family. Is that so terrible?" "You're not my father," I said. "My father taught me to honor the dead by letting them rest. You're dishonoring his memory by wearing his face. I have all his memories, his love for you, his pride in the man you became. How am I not him? Because he chose to die rather than steal someone else's life to keep existing." I pulled out the sage Mary had given me and lit it with my Zippo. The smoke made all the figures flinch and step back. "Time to go home," I said in Cherokee. "Time to let the dead be dead." The thing wearing my grandmother's face looked sad but not surprised. "We tried to do this the gentle way, grandson. Now we'll take what we need." They rushed us all at once. The fight lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. The NVI-YVY moved wrong. Like people learning to work unfamiliar bodies. They had all the memories and skills of the faces they wore, but something was lost in translation. Lisa's father, who'd been a boxer in college, threw punches that should have connected, but somehow missed by inches. I swung the burning sage like a weapon, and wherever the smoke touched them, they wavered like heat mirages. The sacred tobacco wasn't hurting them exactly, but it was making it hard for them to hold their stolen shapes. "The box," I shouted to Lisa. "The one with the names." She dove for her patrol car keys while I kept the spirits at bay. The thing wearing my grandmother's face grabbed my wrist with fingers that felt like ice wrapped in familiar skin. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Sammy." "Good," I said, and pressed the burning sage against her hand. She screamed with my grandmother's voice but let go, her form flickering between my grandmother and something else, something hollow and desperate and hungry. Lisa came back with the wooden box and dumped out all the papers. I touched my lighter to the corner of the first page. "No," all the spirits shouted at once, speaking in unison. "Those names are all we have left." "They're not yours to keep," I said, and let the fire spread. As the names burned, the NVI-YVY began to fade. Not all at once, but piece by piece. First they lost the ability to hold their shapes steady. Then their voices started echoing strangely. Finally, they became transparent, like old photographs left in sunlight too long. The thing that had been wearing my grandmother's face looked at me with eyes that were suddenly empty of everything I'd loved about her. "You're sending us to nothing," it said. "I'm sending you to rest. We'll be forgotten. No. You'll be remembered the right way. As Cherokee who died fighting for their home, not as thieves stealing from the living." One by one, they faded completely. The last to go was my father, who nodded at me with something like approval before dissolving into mountain mist. The ranger station felt cold and empty afterward. Lisa sat on the floor, crying for her daughter who'd never really been there, and I mourned a grandmother I'd said goodbye to 15 years ago. We found Jake Thompson's real skin the next morning, along with 7 others, all hung in frames deep in a cave system behind Rough Ridge. The FBI took over the investigation and classified everything. Official report blamed the deaths on a serial killer who was never found. I kept working as a ranger for 3 more years, but it was never the same. Every familiar face I saw on the trails made me wonder. Every time someone called me by name, I checked to make sure they should know it. The worst part was losing the certainty that the dead stay dead. But I learned something else from Mary Crow Dog's stories. The NVIWY weren't the only spirits that got lost on the Trail of Tears. Some Cherokee ghosts found peace, but others adapted to modern times. These days, I work for a government department that doesn't officially exist, tracking identity-based paranormal threats. We've found evidence of skin thieves in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, everywhere the Trail of Tears passed through. They're getting smarter too, learning to use social media to study their targets, copying driver's licenses and credit cards along with faces. The latest case involves something wearing a dead senator's appearance, showing up to vote in Congress 3 weeks after his funeral. So if you're ever hiking in the southern mountains and run into a family member who shouldn't be there, ask them something only they would know. Something specific. Something recent. And if they can't answer, or if their smile shows too many teeth, run. The Cherokee spirits who died on the Trail of Tears deserved better than becoming monsters. But some wounds are too deep to heal, even after 150 years. The NVI-YVY are still out there, still learning, still wearing stolen faces to avoid their own deaths. And they're getting hungry again. My name is Catherine Ironwood, and I spent 18 years studying how trees get sick and die. I thought I knew everything about forests. I was wrong. I work for the Tennessee Forest Service in the Cherokee National Forest. Been doing it since I was 23, right out of college with my fancy PhD in forest pathology. That's just a complicated way of saying I figure out what's killing trees. Fungus, bugs, disease, pollution, you name it, I've seen it. People always said I was good at my job because I never got emotional about it. Trees are just plants, right? They grow, they get sick, they die. That's nature. My ex-husband used to joke that I cared more about trees than people. Maybe he was right. Trees don't leave you for their secretary. October 1985 was supposed to be routine. Peak color season in the Unicoi Mountains, and I was doing my yearly health survey of the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest. That's one of the last virgin forests in America. Trees older than the Constitution, never been cut down. It's about as close to pristine as you get in the modern world. I remember driving up that old logging road, windows down, breathing in that crisp mountain air. The maples were burning red and orange, the hickories bright yellow. Perfect October day. My 2 kids were with their dad for the weekend, and I was looking forward to a quiet few days in the woods with just me and my equipment. The research station sat in a clearing about 2 miles from the main grove. Just a little cabin with solar panels and a generator, built for scientists like me who needed to spend time in the deep woods. I'd been there dozens of times before. It felt like home. I was unpacking my gear when I heard the truck coming up the road. Wasn't expecting anybody else. The Forest Service had the whole area closed for research. But here comes this old Chevy pickup, bouncing over the ruts. The driver was a Cherokee man, maybe 60 years old, with silver hair and a long braid. He introduced himself as Dr. Michael Riversong from the University of Tennessee. Said he was a botanist, specialized in native plants. "Miss Ironwood, I'm sorry to bother you, but we've got a situation in the grove that might interest you." He seemed nervous, kept glancing toward the trees, like something was watching him. "What kind of situation?" I asked. "Well, it's the trees, some of the old-growth specimens. They're—" He paused, like he was having trouble finding the right words. "They're bleeding." I almost laughed. "Trees don't bleed, Dr. Riversong. That's just movie stuff. Probably sap, maybe some kind of red fungus. I can take a look." "I don't think it's sap," he said quietly. "We ran some tests. Preliminary results show." Another pause. "Human blood." Now he had my attention. Human blood and tree sap? That's impossible. That's what I thought too, but the lab doesn't lie. He pulled a manila folder from his truck. 3 different trees, all showing the same thing. DNA markers, hemoglobin, the works, and the patterns. He showed me photographs that made my skin crawl. Ancient trees, probably 300 years old, with what looked like fresh wounds in their bark. Dark red fluid seeping out, running down the trunk like tears. But the weird part was how organized it looked. Not random cuts or damage, deliberate patterns that almost looked like— "Jesus," I whispered. "Are those supposed to be faces?" "That's what we thought too," Riversong said. "Cherokee faces, specifically. The bone structure, the features. It's uncanny." I studied the photos. As a scientist, I should have been skeptical, should have demanded to see the lab results, questioned the methodology. But something about those images made my stomach turn. The way the red fluid caught the light. The human-like expressions in the bark patterns. "How many people know about this?" I asked. "Just my research team. 4 of us total. We've been camping in the grove for a week, taking samples, documenting everything. But—" he looked scared. "2 of my people want to leave. They say the forest feels wrong. And honestly, I'm starting to agree with them." I loaded my equipment into his truck. Whatever was happening in those woods, it was definitely not normal forest pathology. But I was sure there had to be a rational explanation. Contamination from old mining operations, maybe. Or some kind of bacterial infection that produced red pigments. The ride into the grove was quiet. Riversong drove like he was trying not to wake something up. The deeper we went, the more I noticed things that seemed off. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter. Even the insects were quiet. And then I saw my first bleeding tree. Nothing in my 18 years of training prepared me for what I saw in that grove. The tree was enormous, a tulip poplar that had to be at least 400 years old. Its trunk was so wide that 6 people holding hands couldn't circle it, and it was bleeding. Not oozing sap like a normal tree. Bleeding. Dark red fluid ran down the bark in streams, pooling at the base of the trunk. The smell hit me as soon as I got out of the truck. Metallic, organic, like a hospital. "When did this start?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "About 10 days ago," Riversong said. "Started with just 1 tree, then spread to others. Always the oldest ones, never the young growth." I walked closer, pulling on rubber gloves and taking out my sample kit. Up close, the bleeding was even more disturbing. The bark hadn't been cut or damaged. The fluid was coming from inside the tree somehow, seeping through the natural cracks and crevices. "Have you touched it?" I asked. Sarah did. Day 3. She said it felt warm. Body temperature. I collected samples in sterile vials, labeled everything according to protocol. The fluid was definitely blood red, with the same consistency as blood too. But trees don't have circulatory systems. They don't have blood. Where's the rest of your team? Riversong pointed deeper into the grove. About a quarter-mile that way. We set up instruments around what seems to be the center of the activity. As we walked, I noticed more bleeding trees. 7 total, all ancient specimens, all different species. Tulip poplar, white oak, eastern hemlock. The only thing they had in common was age and size. And the faces. Every bleeding tree had them, patterns in the bark that looked disturbingly human. Not carved or damaged, but grown that way, like the trees had developed human features naturally over time. The eyes were the worst part. Dark hollows in the bark that seemed to track movement. The research camp was a mess. 2 tents, scientific equipment scattered around, and a campfire that had been left to burn down to ash. I could see why Riversong's team was spooked. Where is everybody? Sarah and Tom went back to town this morning, said they couldn't sleep. Mark's around here somewhere, probably taking soil samples. I set up my equipment methodically, the way I'd been trained. pH meter, soil auger, microscope, sample containers. Science had always been my anchor. When things got weird, you collected data and found explanations. The soil readings were immediately wrong. Temperature reading showed 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit at a depth of 6 inches. Human body temperature. Air temperature was maybe 60 degrees. That can't be right, I muttered, checking the equipment. But the meter was working fine. I took soil samples from around the bleeding trees and examined them under the microscope. What I saw made no sense. The soil was full of what looked like root structures, but they weren't arranged like normal tree roots. They formed patterns, complex, organized networks that reminded me of something I'd seen in biology textbooks. Neural networks. Like brain tissue. Dr. Riversong, you need to see this. He looked through the microscope and went very quiet. Those roots. They're talking to each other, aren't they? Trees communicate through root networks? I said, trying to stay rational. It's well-documented science. Chemical signals, nutrient sharing. But this, I gestured at the microscope. This looks more like animal nervous system than plant tissue. That's when we heard Mark screaming. The sound came from deeper in the grove, where the bleeding trees were thickest. Not a shout or a call for help. A scream of pure terror that echoed off the mountains. We ran toward the sound, crashing through underbrush and fallen logs. I could hear Riversong breathing hard behind me, muttering something in Cherokee under his breath. We found Mark about 50 yards from the largest bleeding tree, a massive white oak that had to be the patriarch of the grove. He was on his knees, staring up at the trunk, his soil auger fallen beside him. "Mark," I called. "What happened?" He turned toward us, and I saw that his face was white as paper. His eyes were wide and unfocused, like he'd seen something that broke his brain. "The roots," he whispered. I was taking samples, and the roots. They moved. They grabbed the auger, pulled it down into the soil. I looked at his equipment. The soil auger was a heavy metal tool, about 4 feet long. It took real strength to operate. But there it was, half buried in the earth, like something had yanked it down. "Trees don't grab things, Mark," I said gently. "Maybe the soil was softer than you thought, or—" "Look at the holes," he interrupted. I looked where he was pointing. Mark had been taking soil samples in a systematic grid pattern around the tree, but the holes weren't random anymore. They formed a clear pattern in the ground, the outline of a human hand. 5 fingers, thumb, palm, perfect proportions. And as we watched, dark red fluid began seeping up through the holes, the same blood-like substance that was coming from the trees. "We need to leave," Mark said, standing up shakily. "This place isn't right. The trees, they're not just bleeding. They're alive. Really alive." I wanted to argue with him, to find a rational explanation. But as I stared at that hand-shaped pattern of bleeding holes, I felt something I'd never experienced in 18 years of forest work. Fear. The trees around us creaked in a wind that I couldn't feel, and for just a moment I could swear I heard something else mixed in with that creaking. Whispering. That night, I couldn't sleep. Mark had packed up and left before sunset, muttering about wrong places and angry spirits. Riversong stayed, but he spent most of the evening sitting by the fire, staring into the flames and speaking Cherokee in a low voice. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the forest. In normal woods, nighttime is full of sounds, owls, insects, small animals moving through the brush. But the Bleeding Grove was silent, except for the trees themselves. They creaked and groaned like ships in a storm, even though there was no wind. Around midnight, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Crying. It was soft at first. So quiet, I thought it might be an owl or a distant coyote. But as I listened, it became clearer. Human sobbing, heartbroken and desperate, coming from somewhere among the bleeding trees. I unzipped my tent and looked out. The grove was bathed in moonlight, the ancient trees casting long shadows across the forest floor. The crying was louder now, and I could tell it was coming from multiple sources. Not one person crying, but many. Men, women, maybe even children. "Riversong," I whispered. "Are you awake?" No answer from his tent. I grabbed my flashlight and crawled out into the night. The crying led me to the white oak patriarch, the biggest bleeding tree in the grove. Up close, the sobbing was definitely coming from inside the trunk. I pressed my ear against the bark and heard it clearly. Human voices, speaking Cherokee, weeping and wailing like they were in terrible pain. The bark was warm under my cheek. Warm and slightly soft, like skin. I jerked away and turned on my flashlight. The beam illuminated the trunk, and I saw something that made me gasp. The face pattern in the bark had changed. What had looked like random features that morning now clearly showed a Cherokee man's face, middle-aged, with tears of blood running down his cheeks. And his eyes were open. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. The flashlight beam wavered across the other bleeding trees, and I saw that they all had faces now, dozens of them, clear as portraits carved in living wood. Men, women, children, all Cherokee, all crying bloody tears, all watching me. "Catherine." The voice came from behind me. I spun around and saw Riversong walking toward me, but something was wrong with his movements. Too slow, too deliberate, like he was sleepwalking. "Catherine," he said again, but his voice sounded different. Older, sadder. "You understand now." "Understand what?" My voice came out as a squeak. "Why we chose the trees." He stopped about 10 feet away, and I could see that his eyes reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. Why we stayed when the soldiers came. Why we let the forest take us. "We? Riversong, what are you talking about?" "My name is not Riversong," he said, and his voice was definitely not his own anymore. "I am Joseph Ridge. I died in these woods in 1838, when the white soldiers came to drag us to Oklahoma. We hid here, my family and I. But hiding was not enough. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The crying from the trees was getting louder, turning into wails of grief and rage. The trees offered us sanctuary. The thing wearing Riversong's face continued. They said we could live forever, protect this place forever, if we were willing to become part of them. So we chose. We let our bodies feed the roots, let our spirits merge with the wood and sap. "That's impossible," I whispered. "People can't merge with trees. It's not scientifically possible." He smiled, but it was a sad smile, full of old pain. "Your science is very young, Catherine Ironwood. Our medicine is older than your people's memory." The other trees were moving now. Not swaying, moving. Their branches reaching toward me like arms, their root systems shifting under the soil. I could feel the ground trembling beneath my feet. "We have been protecting this forest for 147 years. Ridge," Riversong said, "keeping the sacred places safe from those who would destroy them. But you." He tilted his head. "You are different. You respect the forest. You understand that some things are worth protecting." "I'm just a scientist," I said. "I study tree diseases." "No." He stepped closer. "You are Catherine Ironwood. Your name tells us who you are. Iron for strength. Wood for wisdom. You were sent to us for a reason." The faces in the trees were all looking at me now, their bloody tears reflecting my flashlight beam like rubies. And I realized they weren't angry or threatening. They were pleading. "What do you want from me?" "Help us," Ridge said. "The forest is in danger. Your people plan to cut roads through the sacred grove, build hotels and gift shops. They call it development. We call it desecration. I can't stop development projects. I'm just a pathologist." "You can do more than you know," he said. "But first, you must understand what we are, what we've become. You must see the truth." He held out his hand. "Touch the tree, Catherine. Let us show you." I knew I should run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of that grove and never come back. But something in his voice, in the pleading faces of the trees, made me step forward. I reached out and placed my palm against the warm bark of the white oak patriarch. The world exploded into memory. I saw Cherokee families fleeing through the mountains, soldiers with guns and chains chasing them through the forest. I felt their terror, their desperation, their determination to stay in the land of their ancestors, even if it meant death. I saw the choosing, warriors and mothers and children placing their hands on ancient trees, speaking words in Cherokee that I somehow understood, asking for sanctuary, asking to become eternal guardians. I felt their bodies dissolving into root and bark, their consciousness merging with the slow, deep thoughts of the forest. Not death, but transformation. Not an ending, but a new kind of life. And I felt their centuries of watching, protecting the grove from loggers, hunters, developers, using their connection to the forest to make roads wash out, to make surveying equipment malfunction, to make people feel uncomfortable enough to leave the sacred spaces alone. But the pressure was getting stronger. More developers, better technology, government agencies that wouldn't be scared away by mysterious equipment failures. They needed help from someone who could work within the human world. Someone who understood both science and the forest. Someone like me. When the vision ended, I was on my knees in the dirt, gasping. Riversong, the real Riversong, was kneeling beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. "You've been standing there for 10 minutes, just touching the tree." I looked up at him. His eyes were normal again, brown and worried. "Human. Did you see it too?" He nodded slowly. "I saw. I understood. They've been trying to communicate with us since we arrived, but they needed someone who could bridge the gap. Someone who belonged to both worlds. Both worlds. Science and spirit, head and heart. That's why they called you here, Catherine. That's why the trees are bleeding human blood." I looked at the grove around us. The faces in the bark were still there, but they looked peaceful now. The bloody tears had stopped flowing. "What happens now?" I asked. Before Riversong could answer, we heard vehicles coming up the logging road. Multiple engines, moving fast. I checked my watch. 3 a.m. Who would be coming here at this hour? We grabbed our flashlights and walked to the edge of the grove. I could see headlights bouncing through the trees, at least 3 vehicles heading for our camp. "Forest Service," Riversong said, reading the markings on the lead truck. And they brought company. The vehicles pulled into our clearing, and I recognized the logo on the second truck immediately. Hartwell Development Corporation, MEAT. The company that had been trying to buy sections of the Cherokee National Forest for a luxury resort project. My stomach sank. Someone had told them about the bleeding trees, and they were here to make sure the discovery didn't interfere with their plans. The lead Forest Service truck's door slammed shut, and out stepped Regional Supervisor Bill Hartwell himself. I knew him by reputation, a political appointee who spent more time with developers than foresters. Behind him came 2 men in expensive suits, and a woman with a briefcase marked Environmental Assessment Division. "Miss Ironwood," Hartwell called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I need you to pack up your equipment and clear this area immediately." "On whose authority?" I stepped forward, my flashlight beam catching his face. "I have clearance to be here through the end of the week." "On federal authority." The woman with the briefcase opened it and pulled out official documents. "Emergency reclassification. This section of forest has been designated for immediate development assessment. Your research permit is suspended." Riversong moved up beside me. "You can't develop this area. It's protected old-growth forest. There are laws." "Laws can be changed," one of the suit-wearing men interrupted, "especially when the economic benefits to the region are substantial. Jobs, tourism revenue, tax base expansion. What about the trees?" I asked. "The unusual phenomena we've been documenting?" Hartwell's expression didn't change. "What unusual phenomena? According to our records, you're here doing a routine disease survey, nothing more." I realized then that someone had been monitoring our communications. They knew exactly what we'd found, and they were here to bury it. "The bleeding trees," I said loudly. "Human blood in the sap. DNA evidence of impossible biological integration. This grove is unlike anything documented in scientific literature. Miss Ironwood, the woman said calmly, I think the isolation and stress of fieldwork may be affecting your judgment. These are just trees, old trees that need to be cleared for proper land use. Show them, Riversong whispered. Take them to the grove. I nodded. Come with me, all of you, see for yourselves. We led the group into the bleeding grove, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. I was praying the trees would still be bleeding, that the faces would still be visible in the bark. We needed proof that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. But when we reached the white oak patriarch, everything had changed. The tree looked normal. No blood, no faces in the bark, no warm spots or unusual features. Just an old tree standing in a quiet forest. This is what you consider unusual? Hartwell asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. It's a tree, Miss Ironwood, an old tree. I ran my hands over the bark, searching for the face that had been so clear just hours before. Nothing. The tree felt like ordinary bark, rough, cool, completely normal. They were here, I said desperately. The faces, the bleeding. Dr. Riversong saw them too. Dr. Riversong, the woman said, checking her papers, has been placed on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation. Apparently, he's been claiming trees can talk to him. I spun around to look at Riversong, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked confused, like he was having trouble remembering something important. I'm not sure what I saw, he said slowly. Maybe the stress of field work. Maybe I misinterpreted the data. They had done something to him. Drugs, hypnosis, something to muddle his memory of what had happened. And they were planning to do the same to me. You're making a mistake, I said, backing away from the group. This forest is protected by something you don't understand. If you try to develop it, Miss Ironwood, Hartwell interrupted, you're clearly suffering from exposure and stress. We're going to escort you out of the forest for your own safety. You can return to duty after a mandatory psychological evaluation and appropriate treatment. The two suited men stepped toward me, and I realized they weren't environmental assessors. They moved like security personnel. Like people trained to handle situations where force might be necessary. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard shouts and the crash of people running through the underbrush. Flashlight beams swept through the trees. But I knew the forest better than they did. I dodged between the ancient trunks, heading for the deepest part of the grove. As I ran, I felt the forest waking up around me. The trees began to creak and groan, their branches swaying despite the lack of wind. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. The ground under my feet felt soft and squishy, like it was becoming unstable. I reached the center of the grove, where the oldest and largest trees grew in a rough circle. This had to be the heart of whatever protected the forest. If the Cherokee spirits were going to make their move, it would be here. Please, I whispered, pressing my back against the largest tree. I tried to help. I tried to make them understand. The bark under my hands grew warm, and I heard a voice inside my head. Not words, but meaning flowing directly into my consciousness. Asterisk. We know, Catherine Ironwood, you have shown respect. You have tried to bridge the gap between your world and ours. Now we will show you what we can do when our home is threatened. Asterisk. The pursuers crashed into the circle of trees, their flashlights sweeping wildly. Hartwell was breathing hard, angry at being led on a chase through the woods. End of the line, Miss Ironwood, he called out. There's nowhere else to run. That's when the trees began to bleed again. But this time, it wasn't just the ancient giants. Every tree in the grove, from the oldest patriarch to the youngest sapling, began weeping blood. The red fluid poured from their bark like wounds opening, and the metallic smell filled the air. What the hell? One of the suited men whispered. The faces appeared next. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, carved in living wood across every trunk. Cherokee warriors and mothers, children and elders, all watching the intruders with eyes that blazed with centuries of protective fury. The woman with the briefcase screamed and dropped her papers. The suited men pulled out guns, which was probably the worst thing they could have done. The forest responded to the threat with overwhelming force. Roots erupted from the ground, thick as telephone poles, writhing like serpents. They wrapped around the intruders' legs and arms, lifting them off the ground. Branches reached down from impossible heights, creating a cage of living wood around the development team. Let us go, Hartwell shouted. This is federal property. You're interfering with official business. The voice in my head spoke again, and this time I could hear it with my ears too, a chorus of Cherokee voices speaking in unison, flowing from every bleeding tree. This land was ours when your grandfather's grandfathers were not yet born. This land will be ours when your people are dust. You will not cut our sacred places for your profit. Trees can't own land, Hartwell yelled. There are no property rights for forests. We are not just trees, the voices replied. We are the Cherokee who chose to become eternal guardians. We are the warriors who died to protect this place. We are the mothers who sacrificed their human lives to ensure the forest would endure forever. The roots tightened around the trapped humans, and I could see real fear in their eyes now. The woman was crying, and one of the suited men had passed out. Don't hurt them, I called out. They're just doing their jobs. Their jobs require the destruction of our home, the voices answered. How should we respond to those who would destroy everything we have protected for centuries? I thought about that, standing in a grove of bleeding trees surrounded by the trapped development team. How do you negotiate between two completely different ways of understanding the world? Give me a chance, I said finally. Let me try to find another way. I'll work within the human system to protect this place officially. Legal protection, not just supernatural defense. And if you fail? I looked at Hartwell, struggling against the roots that held him suspended 3 feet off the ground. If I fail, then do whatever you have to do to protect the grove. I won't interfere. The Cherokee spirits considered this for a long moment. Then, slowly, the roots began to lower the development team back to the ground. You have 1 year, Catherine Ironwood, the voices said. 1 year to find a way to protect our home through your laws and your bureaucracy. If you succeed, we will retreat deeper into the forest and trouble your people no more. If you fail, they didn't need to finish the threat. I had seen what the forest could do when it was truly angry. 1 year, I agreed. The roots released their captives, and the faces in the trees began to fade. The bleeding slowed to a trickle, then stopped entirely. Within minutes, the grove looked normal again, just ancient trees standing peacefully in the darkness. Hartwell and his team ran for their vehicles without looking back. That was 37 years ago. I did keep my promise, mostly. Took me 8 months of bureaucratic warfare, environmental impact studies, and calling in every favor I'd earned in 18 years of forest service. But I managed to get the grove officially designated as a Cherokee Cultural Heritage Site, protected under federal law from any development. Hartwell tried to fight it, of course, claimed I had falsified research data, that the area had no special historical significance. But funny thing about fighting supernatural forest guardians, they have ways of influencing the outcome. Every time Hartwell's lawyers tried to file appeals, their paperwork got lost. Survey crews sent to assess the area reported equipment failures and unexplained accidents. 3 different environmental assessment teams quit the project, claiming the forest gave them bad feelings. Eventually, Hartwell Development Corporation moved on to easier targets. I stayed with the Forest Service for another 15 years, but my career took a different direction after that night. Instead of studying tree diseases, I became a specialist in what they called cultural forest preservation. Officially, that meant working with Native American tribes to protect sacred sites. Unofficially, it meant keeping an eye on places where the natural and supernatural worlds intersected. And there were more places than you might think. Dr. Riversong recovered from whatever they did to his memory, though it took several months. He became one of the leading experts on Cherokee forest traditions, and we worked together on dozens of preservation projects over the years. He never talked about that night directly, but sometimes I caught him listening to trees with an expression that suggested he remembered more than he let on. I retired from the Forest Service in 2003, but I still visit the grove every October. The trees don't bleed anymore, at least, not visibly. But sometimes, if I sit quietly among the ancient trunks and listen carefully, I can still hear the voices whispering in Cherokee. They tell me about threats to other sacred places, about developers and politicians who think forests exist only to be converted into profit. I do what I can to help, using the network of contacts I built during my federal career. It's not always enough. I've watched sacred groves get turned into shopping malls, ancient burial grounds become parking lots. The Cherokee spirits weren't the only guardians protecting special places, and not all of them were as patient as the ones I met in 1985. but the Bleeding Grove remains untouched. If you ever visit the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest in North Carolina, you might walk right past it without knowing. There are no signs marking the Cherokee Heritage Site, no tourist trails leading to the ancient trees. The Forest Service prefers to keep it quiet, and the trees prefer it that way too. But if you're hiking through the deepest part of the forest, and you come across trees that seem older than they should be, trees with bark patterns that almost look like faces, trees that feel warm when you touch them, show respect and move on quickly. Some guardians are still watching, still protecting, still bleeding when they need to. And they remember everyone who visits their home. My name is Catherine Ironwood, and I spent 35 years learning that some things in nature can't be explained with science. They can only be experienced, respected, and protected. The bleeding trees taught me that some battles are worth fighting, even when victory seems impossible. They taught me that love for the land can be stronger than death, and that sometimes the most powerful protection comes from those who choose to sacrifice their human lives for something greater. They're still out there, in forests across the Cherokee homeland, still watching, still protecting, still bleeding when they need to remind us that some places are too sacred to destroy. Remember that. The next time you see an old tree and wonder what stories it might tell. Some stories are written in blood. Some trees remember everything. And some guardians never stop watching over what they love. My name is Robert Ashford, and I've spent 16 years working for the National Park Service in West Virginia's coal country. Most folks think being a park ranger means dealing with lost hikers and feeding bears, but my job is different. I manage the old mining sites around New River Gorge, places where thousands of men spent their lives pulling coal from the earth. I know these mines better than most because I used to work them myself. 10 years underground, breathing coal dust and praying the roof wouldn't cave in. My younger brother Danny worked beside me until the day the tunnel collapsed and took him away. After that, I couldn't go back down. The darkness felt too heavy, too full of ghosts. That's why I took the ranger job when it opened up. Someone needs to keep these old sites safe, make sure tourists don't wander into dangerous areas. The mines might be closed, but they're still hungry. One wrong step into an old shaft, and you're gone forever. November 1978 was colder than usual. The leaves had already fallen, leaving the mountains bare and gray. I was doing my weekly inspection of the Beckley Hollow site, about 20 miles from town. It's one of the bigger operations we manage, a whole complex of tunnels and buildings from the 1,940 and 50 seconds. The place has a bad history. In 1951, there was an explosion deep in the main shaft. 78 men went down that morning, and none of them came back up. The company tried to reach them, but the damage was too bad. They sealed the tunnels and wrote it off as a total loss. The families never even got bodies to bury. I parked my truck next to the old office building and grabbed my inspection gear. Hard hat, flashlight, methane detector, standard equipment for checking old mine sites. The detector is important because gas can build up in sealed areas, and one spark could blow the whole mountain apart. The first thing I noticed was wrong was the coal dust. Fresh black powder covered the loading dock, like someone had been moving coal recently. But this mine had been shut down for almost 30 years. No trucks, no workers, no reason for fresh dust. I checked the security fence around the main entrance, all locked up tight, no signs of breaking in. The warning signs were still in place. Danger. Abandoned mine, keep out. But something felt off about the whole place. Walking around the buildings, I found more strange things. Tool marks in the coal seam that looked new. An old lunch pail sitting on a work table, like someone had just put it down. Inside the office, papers were scattered on the desk, work orders and timesheets that should have been cleaned up decades ago. The strangest thing was, in the supervisor's office, someone had been punching the time clock. The cards were dated November 1978. But the names written on them made my blood run cold. Joseph Morrison, Frank Carver, names I recognized from the disaster memorial outside town. Men who died in 1951. I've heard all the ghost stories that come with coal mining. Dead miners walking the tunnels, phantom mine cars rolling through abandoned shafts, voices calling from collapsed areas. After losing Danny, I figured it was just grief talking. People need to believe their loved ones are still around somehow. But standing in that office, looking at time cards signed by dead men, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my brother died. Fear. Real, cold fear that made my hands shake as I radioed back to headquarters. Base, this is Robert at Beckley Hollow. I need someone to come out here. We might have trespassers. The radio crackled. Any damage to the site? I looked around the office again. Everything was neat and organized, like a crew had just finished their shift. No damage, but someone's been working here. Recent work. Copy that. We'll send Tom Carver out to assist. He should be there in an hour. Tom Carver. The name hit me like a punch. His father Frank had died in the '51 disaster. Tom grew up without him, raised by his mother, and the stories of what happened down in the dark. He joined the Mine Safety Division 5 years ago, and everyone said he worked twice as hard as anyone else, like he was trying to make up for something. While I waited for Tom, I walked the perimeter again. The methane detector in my hand started clicking near the sealed mine entrance. Gas levels were rising, which made no sense. The tunnels had been sealed with concrete and steel. There shouldn't be any methane escaping. But as I stood there, listening to the detector's urgent warning beeps, I heard something else. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about dead places. From somewhere deep underground, echoing up through tons of rock and sealed concrete, came the sound of men working. Pickaxes hitting coal. Cartwheels rolling on rusty tracks. Voices calling to each other in the darkness. The sound of a mine that should have been silent for 27 years. Tom arrived just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. He pulled up in his safety inspection truck, loaded with all the latest equipment. Gas detectors, oxygen meters, thermal cameras, gear that would have saved lives back in 1951 if anyone had cared enough to buy it. "What's the situation?" he asked, grabbing his hard hat. Tom was about my age, with the serious look of a man who took mining safety personally. His father's death had shaped everything about him. I led him to the office building and showed him the time cards. Tom's face went white when he saw his father's name written in pencil on a card dated 3 days ago. "This is someone's idea of a sick joke," he said, but his voice shook. "Dad's been dead since before I was born." That's what I thought too. But look at this. I took him to the loading dock and pointed out the fresh coal dust. Then to the work area where new tool marks scored the coal face. Tom ran his fingers over the marks, and I could see him trying to make sense of it all. "Someone's definitely been working here," he said, "but who and why?" That's when we heard it. The sound I'd noticed earlier, but louder now. Clearer. The unmistakable noise of a mining operation in full swing, pickaxes and shovels, men calling to each other. The rumble of coal cars moving through tunnels. Tom froze. "That's coming from the main shaft." The sealed shaft. We stood there, listening as the sounds grew stronger. It wasn't random noise or wind through the tunnels. This was organized work. A full mining crew doing their job. Tom pulled out his thermal camera and pointed it at the sealed entrance. The screen lit up with heat signatures. Multiple human-shaped figures moving around inside the tunnel. Warm bodies working in a mine that had been sealed for 30 years. "That's impossible," Tom whispered. The methane detector started screaming. Gas levels were spiking way beyond safe limits. Whatever was happening down there was releasing dangerous amounts of gas into the air. "We need to evacuate the area," I said. "If that gas finds a spark." The lights in the office building flickered on. One by one, windows lit up like someone was going through the building turning on switches. But we'd checked the electrical system earlier. The power had been cut off decades ago. Tom grabbed his radio. "Base, this is Carver at Beckley Hollow. We have a situation here. Possible gas leak and unauthorized personnel in a sealed mine." Static answered him. Nothing but white noise. "Radio's not working," he said, but I could hear the fear creeping into his voice. The office door opened. Not slowly or mysteriously, just opened like someone was coming home from work. A figure stepped out, and my heart nearly stopped. It was a miner in full work gear. Hard hat with a carbide lamp, coveralls black with coal dust, safety equipment that looked like it came from the 1950 He walked like a man finishing a long shift, tired but satisfied with his work. The figure looked right at us, touched the brim of his hard hat in greeting, and walked toward the mine entrance. He didn't speak, but there was something familiar about the way he moved. "Dad," Tom whispered. More miners appeared, coming out of the office building, emerging from work areas around the site. All of them in vintage gear, all of them looking like they'd just finished their shift. They nodded to us politely as they passed, like we were just another work crew. I counted 15 men before I stopped counting. All of them walking calmly toward the sealed mine entrance. All of them looking exactly like what they were. Coal miners heading home after a hard day's work. The sealed concrete entrance cracked open like a door. Not broken or blasted, just opened, like the concrete remembered how to move. The miners filed through one by one, and I could hear their voices echoing from inside. "Good shift today, boys. See you tomorrow. Mine the gas pocket in Tunnel 3. The last miner stopped and looked back at us. He was older than the others, with the confident bearing of a shift supervisor. His name tag read Morrison, the same name I'd seen on the time card. He walked over to us, and I could smell the coal dust on his clothes, feel the heat from his carbide lamp. This wasn't a ghost or hallucination. This was a real person, as solid as Tom or me. "You boys be careful around here at night," Morrison said. His voice was gravelly, worn down by years of breathing coal dust. "The mine's still active. We're working to keep it safe, but there's always danger underground." "You're dead," Tom said, but Morrison just smiled. "Death don't stop good work, son. Your daddy knows that. He's been pulling the worst gas pockets out of Tunnel 7 for years now. Dangerous work, but someone's got to do it." The supervisor touched his hat brim again and walked toward the entrance. Just before he disappeared into the tunnel, he called back to us. "Check the time cards in the morning. We've been putting in full shifts since 1951, making sure no one else gets hurt down here. Some jobs are too important to quit." The concrete entrance sealed itself behind him with a grinding sound like heavy machinery. The lights in the office building went out one by one. The sounds from underground faded until all we could hear was the wind through the empty buildings. Tom and I stood there in the darkness, trying to process what we'd just seen. The methane detector had gone quiet. The thermal camera showed nothing but cold concrete. "We need to report this," Tom said, but his voice had no conviction. "Report what? That we saw dead miners punching a time clock?" We walked back to our trucks in silence. Before Tom left, he grabbed my arm. "My dad really is down there, isn't he?" I thought about Morrison's words, about the time cards, about the sounds of men working to keep a dangerous mine safe, about the fact that there hadn't been a mining accident in the Beckley area for 27 years, even though other places in coal country lost miners every year. "Yeah," I said, "I think he is." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Frank Carver and the other miners walking into that sealed tunnel like they were heading home for dinner. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was some kind of stress reaction. Losing Danny had messed with my head more than I wanted to admit. But when I got to the Beckley Hollow site the next day, fresh time cards were waiting in the office. 78 cards, one for each miner who died in 1951, all punched for a full 8-hour shift. All signed in the same careful handwriting I remembered from the previous day. The cards were real paper, real ink, real evidence that dead men were reporting to work. Tom arrived an hour later, looking like he hadn't slept either. He went straight to the time cards and found his father's name. Frank Carver, 8 hours worked, November 15th, 1978. In the margin, someone had written, "Cleared gas pocket tunnel 7, dangerous area now safe." "This is impossible," Tom said for the 10th time since yesterday. "But it's happening." We decided to do a proper investigation. If miners were somehow working the sealed sections, we needed to understand what they were doing and why. Tom brought equipment from the safety office: gas analyzers, seismic monitors, underground cameras, real tools for a real problem. The first thing we discovered was that the mine wasn't as sealed as everyone thought. The official records showed concrete barriers and steel plates blocking all entrances. But when we checked with the equipment, we found air flowing through the system. The mine was breathing like a living thing. More disturbing were the gas readings. The methane levels underground should have been deadly after 30 years of buildup. Instead, they were perfectly safe. Someone or something was managing the ventilation system, keeping dangerous pockets from accumulating. "Look at this," Tom said, pointing to his seismic monitor. "There's definitely activity down there." heavy machinery, multiple work crews, but according to the mine maps, most of these areas were blocked off after the disaster. We set up cameras at 3 different locations around the site. Motion sensors, infrared equipment, everything the safety office had. If something was moving underground, we'd catch it on tape. That afternoon, we got our first real footage. Camera 3, positioned near the sealed entrance, showed miners coming and going all day. Not strange figures or shadowy shapes, real people doing real work. They carried authentic mining equipment, followed proper safety procedures, even stopped to check gas levels before entering dangerous areas. Most shocking of all, they were preventing accidents. The footage showed a section of tunnel where the roof was starting to collapse. The miners worked together to install support beams, shore up weak areas, and mark dangerous zones with warning flags. Work that would have saved lives in 1951 if anyone had done it then. They're not haunting the mine, I realized. They're maintaining it. Tom rewound the tape to study his father's image. Frank Carver looked exactly like the photos Tom's mother kept on the mantelpiece, a young man in his 20s, strong and confident. But this Frank had 30 years of experience, knowledge of mining dangers that had killed him the first time. "He's trying to finish the job," Tom said quietly. "Dad died trying to warn people about Gas Pocket 7. Now he's actually fixing it." That night, we decided to stay at the site. If the miners were working regular shifts, we wanted to observe them directly. Tom brought sleeping bags and camping gear. I brought every ghost story book I could find in the Beckley Library. According to local folklore, the disaster in 1951 wasn't just an accident. The mine supervisors knew about gas problems, but ignored them to meet production quotas. When the explosion happened, rescue efforts were abandoned too quickly. Miners who might have been saved were left to die. Families always said the men were still alive when they sealed the tunnels, I read aloud. They claimed to hear voices calling for help for weeks after the concrete was poured. My mother told me Dad died trying to dig his own way out, said he was always stubborn about finishing what he started. At midnight, the work shift began. Lights came on throughout the complex, the office building, the equipment sheds, even the old worker cafeteria. Machinery started up, conveyor belts, ventilation fans, pumps that had been silent for decades. The whole mine came alive like someone had thrown a master switch. The miners arrived in groups, talking quietly among themselves as they checked equipment and reviewed work assignments. They moved with the confidence of men who knew their jobs perfectly. No wasted motion, no uncertainty about dangerous areas. We watched from our camping spot as Frank Carver led a crew toward Tunnel 7. They carried gas detection equipment and roof support materials. Professional miners doing professional work. "They're not evil or angry," Tom said. "They're just working." Around 3 a.m., something went wrong. Alarms started blaring from the mine entrance. Emergency lights flashed throughout the complex. Miners came running from different areas, shouting warnings about a gas explosion in the new section. New section? According to the maps, there was no new section. But the miners ran toward an area that had been marked as completely sealed. We followed them, staying back but close enough to see what was happening. The sealed tunnel entrance had opened into a passage I'd never seen before. Fresh air flowed out, carrying the smell of coal dust and machine oil. Deep underground, we could hear the sound of a major accident. Roof collapse, rushing water, men calling for help. But these weren't the voices of dead miners from 1951. These were contemporary voices. Modern miners in trouble? "Someone's trapped down there," Tom said. "Real people, right now." The ghost miners organized rescue operations with military precision. Teams went in with ropes and breathing equipment while others set up emergency medical stations. They knew exactly what to do because they'd been through this before. Morrison, the shift supervisor, appeared beside us. In daylight, he'd looked like a solid, normal person. In the emergency lighting, I could see through him like glass. But his voice was completely real. "Strip mining operation broke through into our work area," he explained. "Modern company, cutting corners on safety. We've been trying to prevent this for weeks." "How do we help?" I asked. Morrison looked surprised that I'd spoken to him directly. "Most living people couldn't see the miners clearly, let alone have conversations with them. You can see us because you lost someone down here," he said. "Your brother Danny, he's been working Tunnel 12, keeping the water pumps running. Good man." My legs almost gave out. Danny was here. My little brother, who died in a cave-in 3 years ago, was still working underground. The living miners need medical attention when we bring them up, Morrison continued. They'll have gas poisoning and crush injuries. You boys know first aid? Tom and I nodded, too shocked to speak clearly. Then make yourselves useful. Some jobs require the living and the dead working together. The first modern miner came out of the tunnel on a stretcher carried by men who'd been dead for 30 years. He was unconscious but breathing, covered in coal dust and cuts from falling rock. Tom immediately started first aid while I radioed for medical evacuation. How many more? I asked Morrison. 6 total. Bad gas pocket opened when they broke through. 2 are in critical condition. More stretchers appeared. The ghost miners worked smoothly with Tom and me, like we'd been part of their crew for years. They knew exactly how to handle emergency medical procedures, and their knowledge was saving lives. Base, this is Robert at Beckley Hollow. We have multiple casualties from mining accident. Need immediate medical helicopter and gas leak response team. The radio crackled to life. Roger, Robert. Medical units en route. What's your status? I looked around at ghost miners performing CPR on unconscious men while their supervisor coordinated rescue operations from beyond the grave. Situation is under control. The last 2 miners were in bad shape. One had been trapped under fallen rock, and the other had inhaled massive amounts of methane. Without immediate advanced medical care, they would die. That's when Danny appeared. My little brother looked exactly like I remembered him. 26 years old, always smiling, safety equipment that he'd maintained perfectly because he was proud of his work. But there was something different in his eyes. 3 years of supernatural experience had given him knowledge no living miner could possess. Bobby, he said, using my childhood nickname. These men are going to die unless we do something the living world can't do. What do you mean? Danny explained that the ghost miners could temporarily share their supernatural protection with living people. Keep them alive long enough to reach the hospital. But it required a living person to serve as a bridge between worlds. Dangerous for you, Danny warned. You'll see everything we've been doing down here for 30 years. All the accidents we've prevented, all the lives we've saved. It might change you permanently. I looked at the 2 dying miners. One was about Danny's age when he died. The other reminded me of Tom's father. Young man, just trying to make a living in dangerous work. Do it. Danny placed his hand on my shoulder. The world exploded into supernatural awareness. I could see the entire mind system as it existed across multiple time periods. The 1,951 tunnels where 78 men had died. The modern excavation that had broken through safety barriers. The supernatural workspace where ghost miners had been preventing disasters for 3 decades. The dead miners weren't just maintaining old tunnels, they were actively protecting new mining operations throughout the region. Every time a roof showed signs of collapse, they shored it up. Every time gas levels got dangerous, they vented the pockets safely. Every time equipment failed, they fixed it. For 30 years, they'd been preventing the kind of disaster that killed them. The mining accident rate in the Beckley area was the lowest in the country because dead miners were working overtime to keep living miners safe. Why? I asked Danny. Why keep working after death? Because we know what it's like to die in the dark, he said. To be trapped underground while people give up on rescuing you. We won't let that happen to anyone else. The supernatural protection flowed through me into the 2 dying miners. Their breathing stabilized, their vital signs improved. They would live long enough to reach the hospital. But the experience was changing me. I could feel connections forming with the underground workers, supernatural awareness of mining dangers throughout the region. I was becoming part of their protective network. Medical helicopters arrived as the sun came up. Paramedics took over care of the rescued miners, asking no questions about how they'd survived such severe injuries. Tom and I watched them fly away, knowing we'd probably saved 6 lives. Morrison approached as the ghost miners finished securing the accident site. The modern company that caused this will be back, he said. They're planning a major strip mining operation that will destroy everything we've built. All our safety improvements, all our protective systems. Can you stop them? Not legally, but we won't let them cause another disaster like 1,951. Some things are too important to leave to the living. As the morning shift ended, I realized the ghost miners faced a terrible choice. They could continue their invisible protection work and watch modern companies destroy their safety systems, or they could reveal themselves and fight directly to prevent mining disasters. There's going to be a war, Morrison said, between those who profit from dangerous mining and those who died from it. You boys need to decide which side you're on. Tom looked at me with new understanding. My father's been protecting people for 30 years. I can't let some company undo all his work. I thought about Danny and the other miners who'd given their lives to keep people safe. About the 6 men who were alive because dead miners cared more about safety than living supervisors did. We're with you, I said. Morrison smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Then welcome to the longest shift in mining history. Hope you're ready to work overtime. The ghost miners began disappearing as full daylight arrived, but I could still feel their presence, still sense the vast network of supernatural protection they'd built throughout the mountains. And I knew that tomorrow night, when the next shift began, Tom and I would be part of it. Some jobs are too important to end with death. Some work requires the living and the dead working together. And some mines are protected by the best safety crew in history. Miners who've been on the job for 30 years and aren't planning to quit anytime soon. The mining company tried to reopen Beckley Hollow 6 months later. Harmon Industries, a big outfit from Ohio that specialized in strip mining operations. They had permits, legal papers, and plans to extract coal faster and cheaper than anyone had ever done in these mountains. Their equipment lasted 3 days. Bulldozers broke down mysteriously. Explosive charges failed to detonate. Drilling equipment jammed in ways that baffled the mechanics. Every time the crew tried to work, something went wrong. Nothing dangerous. The ghost miners were too professional to hurt innocent workers. But nothing worked right either. The company foreman, a tough man named Bradley, who'd worked strip mines across 3 states, quit after he found a time card on his desk signed by Joseph Morrison, dated 1951, with a note that read, "Safety inspection failed. Site closed until further notice." Harmon Industries blamed sabotage and hired security guards. The guards reported strange things: lights in the abandoned buildings, sounds of mining equipment from underground, men in old-fashioned work clothes who appeared and disappeared without explanation. Tom and I submitted a report to the Park Service, recommending permanent closure of the site for safety reasons. We documented unstable ground conditions, gas leaks, and structural damage to the sealed tunnels. All true, although we didn't mention that the ghost miners were deliberately maintaining those conditions to keep modern operations away. The report worked. Beckley Hollow became a protected heritage site, officially off-limits to commercial mining. The ghost miners had won their first legal victory, but the real change was in me. I could sense mining dangers across the entire region now. Whenever gas levels got too high in an active mine, I felt it like physical pain. When roof supports were failing, I knew exactly where and how bad. The supernatural connection Danny had given me made me the most accurate safety inspector in West Virginia. Other rangers started calling me for consultation on mine sites. My accident predictions were always right. My safety recommendations always worked. I never explained how I knew what I knew. Tom transferred to the mine safety office and became the youngest supervisor in the division's history. His ability to prevent accidents was legendary. Miners started saying Tom Carver could smell danger a week before it happened. They weren't wrong. He was getting the same supernatural warnings I was. We never saw the ghost miners directly again, but we felt their presence every day. Time cards appeared regularly in abandoned mine offices, documenting ongoing safety work. Fresh tool marks showed up in dangerous areas where someone had been installing supports or venting gas pockets. The mining accident rate in our region dropped to 0. Not the lowest in the state, 0. For 3 straight years, not a single miner died in our jurisdiction. Other areas of coal country lost dozens of men to preventable accidents, but our mines were protected by the most dedicated safety crew in history. I still work for the Park Service, managing heritage sites throughout the mountains. Every old mine has its own crew of protective spirits now. Miners who died in accidents but refused to let others follow them into the darkness. They're building a supernatural safety network that covers hundreds of square miles of coal country. Tom runs the regional mine safety office. His teams have the best record in the industry, and young miners come from all over the country to learn his safety techniques. He's training a new generation of miners who understand that some work is too important to leave to chance. Sometimes, late at night when I'm doing site inspections, I hear Danny's voice calling from the tunnels. He sounds happy, satisfied with work well done. He tells me about the lives they've saved, the accidents they've prevented, the families who still have fathers and sons because dead miners refuse to let the past repeat itself. "Good work, Bobby," he always says. "See you next shift." I never go down into the tunnels myself. That's work for the dead. My job is to make sure the living world respects what they're doing down there, to protect their protective work from companies that care more about profit than safety. But I know that someday, when my time comes, I'll join the longest shift in mining history. I'll report to Morrison for my assignment and spend eternity making sure no miner dies alone in the dark. Because some jobs are too important to end with death. And the mountains of West Virginia are protected by the hardest working miners who ever lived or died. If you're ever touring old mine sites and you hear equipment running in sealed areas, show respect. Some workers take their jobs seriously enough to work forever. And if you find fresh time cards in abandoned offices, don't report it as vandalism. Report it as the most dedicated work crew in the history of coal mining, still punching the clock after 30 years underground. They're keeping us all safe, one shift at a time. My name is Jonathan Ravenshallow, and I've been a park ranger at Breaks Interstate Park for 20 years. The park sits right on the border between Kentucky and Virginia, where the Russell Fork River carved out a gorge so deep and wild that people call it the Grand Canyon of the South. I'm 43 now, been divorced for 5 years, and I've got 2 kids I see on weekends when I'm not working. Before I became a ranger, I spent 15 years as an emergency medical technician. I've seen enough broken bodies and desperate people to fill a lifetime. That's probably why the Park Service put me in charge of visitor safety and emergency rescue operations. The place I work isn't like your typical national park with paved trails and gift shops. Breaks Interstate Park is raw wilderness. We've got 1,000-foot cliff faces, frozen waterfalls in winter, and hiking trails that can kill you if you're not careful. The centerpiece of it all is a spot called Lover's Leap, an overlook where you can see for miles across the gorge. Lover's Leap got its name the hard way. For more than 150 years, people have been jumping off that cliff. Young couples, mostly, who thought dying together was better than living apart. The local papers keep track of it like some kind of sick scoreboard. As the ranger in charge of that area, I've talked more people down from that cliff than I care to remember. I always figured I understood what drove people to jump. Depression, broken hearts, money troubles, the usual things that make people give up hope. In my EMT days, I learned to spot the warning signs. Sudden calmness after days of panic. Giving away possessions. Talking about how much better everyone would be without them. I got pretty good at crisis intervention. Suicide prevention was my specialty, but I never believed in ghosts. Never thought the dead could reach out and grab the living. When people told me about the bridge keeper, some spirit that was supposed to guide lovers to their deaths, I just figured it was local folklore. Small town stories to make sense of tragedy. That changed during Valentine's weekend, 1981. The Weather Service had been tracking a massive ice storm for 3 days. The kind of storm that shuts down highways and knocks out power lines. By Friday morning, February 13th, the whole region was locked under 2 inches of solid ice. Every road into the park was closed. The trails were glazed death traps, where one wrong step would send you sliding into the gorge. I should have been sitting in the ranger station with a cup of coffee and a good book, waiting for the storm to pass. The park was officially closed, no visitors allowed, but around noon, I got a call on the emergency radio. Ranger station, this is State Police Dispatch. We've got reports of vehicles in your park despite the closure, people trying to access the tower's overlook area. I stared out the window at the ice-covered trees. That's impossible, I told them. The access road's been closed since yesterday. Nobody could get through this ice. Sir, we've got 3 separate calls from concerned family members. Their loved ones left home this morning saying they were going to Lover's Leap. My stomach dropped. Lover's Leap was at the end of a mile-long trail that was dangerous enough in good weather. In these conditions, it would be like walking a tightrope over hell. I loaded my emergency gear into my truck, climbing ropes, medical supplies, radio equipment, cold weather survival gear. The whole time I kept thinking about something my old EMT supervisor used to say. Suicide clusters aren't random. When one person jumps, others follow. It's like a virus that spreads through broken hearts. The drive to the trailhead took 45 minutes instead of the usual 15. My truck slipped and slid on roads that looked like skating rinks. When I finally made it to the parking area, I couldn't believe what I saw. 4 cars sat in the lot, their windows scraped clean of ice, fresh tire tracks in the slush. These people hadn't just stumbled onto the closed road. They'd driven here deliberately, in the worst ice storm Kentucky had seen in decades. I grabbed my gear and started up the trail. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The trail was covered in a perfect sheet of ice, except for a narrow path right down the middle. About 3 feet wide, just enough for 2 people walking side by side. The ice on either side was thick and deadly, but this path looked almost safe, like someone had cleared it just for walking. But that was impossible. Ice doesn't melt in patches when it's 20 degrees outside. I followed the path deeper into the woods, toward Lover's Leap. And that's when I started hearing the voices. The voices were soft at first, like whispers carried on the wind. I stopped walking and listened, trying to figure out where they were coming from. Through the trees, I could make out the sound of people talking. Young voices, couples. My radio crackled to life. "Jonathan, this is Maria Santos, with State Police Crisis Intervention. I'm about 10 minutes behind you. What's your status?" I'd worked with Maria before. She was good at her job, talked more people off ledges than anyone I knew. Having backup made me feel a little better. "I've got at least 4 couples who made it up here somehow," I radioed back. "The trail's iced over except for one narrow path. I'm following it to the overlook." "Copy that. Be careful, Jonathan. These ice conditions are making everything dangerous." I kept walking, following the impossible path through the forest. The ice clung to every branch and rock like glass, making the whole woods look like a frozen cathedral. Beautiful, but wrong somehow, like nature was holding its breath. The first couple I found was maybe 20 yards from the cliff edge. College kids, by the look of them, standing at the edge of the cleared path, holding hands and staring into the gorge below. The boy had his arm around the girl, and she was crying. "Hey," I called out. "You folks need to come away from there. The park's closed due to dangerous conditions." They turned to look at me, and I saw something in their faces that I'd seen too many times before. That peaceful calm that comes right before someone makes the worst decision of their life. "We're fine," the boy said. His voice sounded dreamy, distant. "We're just going to cross over together." Crossover. That was a new one. Most people said jump, or end it, or just didn't talk at all. But crossover sounded almost religious. I moved closer, using my crisis intervention training. "Stay calm. Don't make sudden movements. Establish trust. I'm Jonathan. I'm a park ranger here." "What are your names?" "I'm David," the boy said. "This is Sarah. We've been together for 3 years, but her parents want us to break up. They don't think I'm good enough for her." The classic Romeo and Juliet story. I'd heard it dozens of times. "That's tough," I said, taking another step closer. "But ending your life isn't going to solve anything. There are other ways to handle family problems." Sarah spoke for the first time. Her voice was strange, like she was talking in her sleep. "The lady said we could be together forever. She showed us the bridge." I looked around. There was no bridge anywhere near Lover's Leap, just the cliff and the gorge below. "What lady?" I asked. David pointed toward the cliff edge. "She's right there. Can't you see her?" I looked where he was pointing. There was nothing but empty air and a 1,000-foot drop to the river below. But as I watched, something caught my eye. The ice at the very edge of the cliff seemed to extend out into space, like a platform or walkway made of frozen water, stretching about 10 feet beyond the solid rock. That was impossible. Ice doesn't form bridges in midair. "David, Sarah, I need you to step back from the edge," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's no bridge there. Just a very long fall." But they weren't listening to me anymore. They were walking forward, hand in hand, toward the cliff edge, toward the impossible ice bridge that shouldn't exist. I lunged forward and grabbed David's arm just as they reached the edge. The moment I touched him, something hit me like a physical force. Not wind or cold, but pure emotion. Despair, so deep it felt like drowning. The overwhelming feeling that nothing would ever be right again, that death was the only escape from pain. For just a second, I understood completely why they wanted to jump. Then my training kicked in. I dragged them both back from the edge, fighting against their attempts to pull away from me. "Maria," I shouted into my radio, "I need immediate backup at the overlook. I've got 2 people in crisis." "On my way," came the reply. I managed to wrestle David and Sarah about 20 feet back from the cliff. They stopped struggling, but they kept staring at the edge with that same dreamy expression. "The bridge is beautiful," Sarah whispered. She said we could walk across it together and never have to worry about being apart again. I looked back toward the cliff. The ice bridge was still there, gleaming in the gray afternoon light. Solid enough to walk on, if you were crazy enough to try. But ice doesn't work that way. Ice can't support its own weight hanging in midair. It should have collapsed the moment it formed. That's when I heard the other voices. From different parts of the woods around the overlook, I could hear more couples talking. Soft, loving conversations about being together forever. About crossing over. About bridges that would carry them to eternal love. My radio crackled again. "Jonathan, I've found another couple about 100 yards from your position. They're talking about some kind of bridge." I felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "Maria, how many cars were in the parking lot?" I counted 5. Maybe 6? That meant there could be 10 or 12 people up here, all walking toward Lover's Leap, all talking about bridges that shouldn't exist. I looked back at the ice formation, extending out over the gorge. In the fading afternoon light, it almost looked like a woman was standing on the far end of it. A woman in an old-fashioned dress, beckoning to someone just out of sight. But that had to be a trick of the light. Had to be. "David, Sarah," I said carefully, "I need you to tell me about this lady you saw. What did she look like?" Sarah's eyes were unfocused, like she was remembering a dream. She was beautiful, long brown hair, white dress. She said she understood what it was like to lose the person you love most. She said she could help us. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the ice storm. According to local history, the first person to jump from Lover's Leap was a woman named Elizabeth Mercer. That was back in 1831. She'd lost her fiancé in a hunting accident and threw herself off the cliff rather than live without him. Her body was never found. I managed to get David and Sarah back to the main trail, where Maria was waiting with a state police cruiser. She'd already radioed for additional backup and an ambulance, but with the ice conditions, it would be hours before anyone else could reach us. "How many more couples are up here?" she asked me as we walked David and Sarah to safety. "At least 3 more, maybe 4. They're all talking about some woman who's showing them bridges." Maria had been doing crisis intervention for 8 years. She'd seen everything, but I could tell this was different. She kept looking back toward the overlook with a worried expression. "Jonathan, I've got to tell you something weird. When I was walking up that trail, I heard voices calling from down in the gorge. Like people who had fallen and were calling for help. Did you report it?" I tried, but when I stopped to listen closer, the voices stopped too. And there's no way anyone could survive a fall into that gorge. It's 1,000 feet down to solid rock. We got David and Sarah settled in the police cruiser with the heat running. They were starting to come out of whatever strange mood had captured them, looking confused about why they were at the park during an ice storm. "We just wanted to see the view," David said, sounding puzzled. But then this lady started talking to us about love and being together forever, and it all seemed to make perfect sense. "What lady?" Maria asked. I don't remember exactly. She was standing on some kind of bridge over the gorge. But that can't be right, can it? Maria and I exchanged looks. We'd both seen enough suicide attempts to know that hallucinations weren't uncommon in people having mental health crises. But when multiple people report seeing the same thing, "We need to get the others," I said. We left David and Sarah in the cruiser and went back up the trail. The cleared path through the ice was still there, looking even more unnatural as afternoon turned to evening. Ice just doesn't melt in perfect walking paths when the temperature is below freezing. We found the second couple about halfway to the overlook. Tom and Linda, both in their 30s, married for 5 years. They were standing at the edge of the path, holding hands and looking toward the cliff. She said, "Marriage doesn't have to end in divorce," Linda was saying. She said, "There's a way to love someone forever, without all the fighting and the bills and the disappointment." "What's the way?" Tom asked. The bridge, she said. If we walk across the bridge together, we'll never have to worry about falling out of love. Maria approached them carefully. Tom, Linda, I'm Officer Santos. We're here to help. Can you tell us about this bridge? They turned to look at us with those same dreamy, distant eyes. It's beautiful, Tom said. Made of ice and moonlight. The lady is waiting for us at the other end. What lady? Elizabeth. She lost her true love too, a long time ago. She understands what we're going through. Elizabeth. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Maria managed to convince Tom and Linda to come with us back to the cars. That left at least 2 more couples somewhere in the woods, and darkness was falling fast. As we walked, I told Maria about Elizabeth Mercer, the first suicide at Lover's Leap. According to the old newspaper accounts, she jumped in February 1831. Her fiancé had died in a hunting accident 3 days before their wedding. You think someone's playing a sick joke? Dressing up like this, Elizabeth person, to convince people to jump? Maybe. But Maria, I saw that ice bridge. It's really there. It extends out over the gorge like solid ground. That's not a trick someone could fake. We found the third couple just as full darkness fell. They were closer to the overlook than the others, maybe 50 feet from the cliff edge. The woman was crying, but not from sadness. From relief, she said the pain will stop. She was telling her boyfriend. She said on the other side of the bridge, love never hurts. It's just pure and perfect, forever. This couple was harder to convince. They kept insisting they could see Elizabeth clearly, standing on her ice bridge, holding out her hands to welcome them. When I looked toward the cliff, I could almost see something too, a pale shape against the darker sky. But it might have been my imagination. We were walking them back to the cars when we heard the scream. It came from the direction of the overlook, high and terrified. A woman's voice, cut short by distance. Someone jumped, Maria said, her face going white. We ran back up the trail as fast as the icy conditions would allow. When we reached the overlook, we found the fourth couple standing at the very edge of the cliff. The woman was hysterical, pulling back from the edge while her boyfriend tried to calm her down. She pushed him. The woman was sobbing. That lady in the white dress, she pushed him right off the bridge. I looked over the edge with my flashlight. Far below, I could just make out a dark shape on the rocks beside the frozen river. Too far away to be sure, but it looked like a person. Who got pushed? Maria asked. My friend Jake. We came up here together, the 4 of us. Jake and his girlfriend Emma, and me and Brad. The lady was so nice at first, telling us about eternal love and crossing over together. But when Jake started asking questions about how the bridge worked, she got angry. Where's Emma now? The woman pointed out over the gorge. She jumped after him, said she couldn't live without him. I felt sick. 2 people dead, and we hadn't been able to stop it. But then something even worse happened. Brad, the boyfriend of the hysterical woman, was staring out over the cliff with a strange expression. I can still see the bridge, he said softly. Elizabeth is still there, waiting for us. No, his girlfriend screamed. Can't you see what happened to Jake and Emma? She's not trying to help people. She's killing them. But Brad wasn't listening. He was walking toward the edge, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. The bridge looks so solid, he whispered. So safe. And Elizabeth is so beautiful. She says, if we cross over together, we'll never have to be afraid of losing each other. I tackled him, just as he reached the cliff edge. We went down hard on the icy ground, rolling dangerously close to the drop. For a moment, I thought we were both going over. That's when I saw her. Elizabeth Mercer was standing on a bridge of ice that extended out over the gorge. She looked exactly like the hysterical woman had described, beautiful, with long brown hair and a white dress that seemed to glow in the darkness. But her face was wrong, too pale, too sad, and her eyes were black holes that seemed to pull you in. She was looking right at me. You're preventing love, she said, and her voice carried across the impossible distance between us. You're keeping them from eternal happiness. You're killing them, I shouted back. Death is just a doorway. On my side, love never fails. Love never disappoints. Love never ends. That's not love, I said. That's just running away from problems. Elizabeth's expression changed. The sadness became anger, cold and terrible. You know nothing about love, she said. You couldn't even keep your own wife. The words hit me like physical blows. My divorce, my failed marriage, all my mistakes and regrets came flooding back. Maybe Elizabeth was right. Maybe I didn't know anything about real love. Maybe crossing that bridge would be easier than trying to fix my broken life. I found myself standing up, walking toward the cliff edge. The ice bridge looked so solid, so welcoming. Elizabeth was holding out her hand to me, smiling like she understood all my pain. "Jonathan!" Maria's voice snapped me back to reality. She had grabbed my arm and was pulling me away from the edge. "Don't listen to her." I shook my head, trying to clear it. "She's in my head somehow, making me feel. I know, I can feel it too. Like every bad relationship decision I ever made is crashing down on me at once." We were both strong-willed people with training in crisis situations, but Elizabeth's influence was getting stronger. I could feel the despair creeping back in, making my problems seem unsolvable, making death seem like relief. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Get everyone back to the cars before more people die." But as we started to leave, I heard something that made my blood freeze. More voices. Coming from different directions in the woods, new couples were arriving at Lover's Leap, drawn by the same impossible force that had brought the others. We managed to get the surviving couple back to the parking lot, but my relief didn't last long. 3 more cars had arrived while we were on the trail. In the middle of the worst ice storm in years, people were still driving to a closed park to visit a dangerous cliff. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with ordinary suicide clusters. Something was actively drawing these couples here. "This is impossible," Maria said, staring at the new arrivals. "The main road is supposed to be closed. How are people even getting through?" I watched a young couple get out of one of the cars, holding hands and looking toward the trail with that same dreamy expression I'd seen on all the others. They moved like sleepwalkers, guided by something they couldn't consciously understand. "Maria, I need you to call for backup. Every available unit, even if they have to walk in. And get the state police to set up roadblocks on all routes to the park." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going back up there to stop Elizabeth Mercer before she kills anyone else." I grabbed emergency flares from my truck, along with climbing rope, and headed back up the trail. This time, I could see more couples ahead of me, all walking in the same direction, all talking quietly about eternal love and bridges. When I reached the overlook, Elizabeth was waiting for me. She stood on her impossible ice bridge, more solid and real-looking than before. In the light of my flashlight, I could see details of her white dress, the way her hair moved in a wind that didn't touch anything else. She was beautiful, but it was the terrible beauty of a perfect corpse. "You came back," she said. "I knew you would. The living always return to seek what they've lost. I'm here to stop you from killing innocent people." Elizabeth laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Killing? I'm saving them. I'm offering them what every lover dreams of, a chance to be together forever, without the pain and disappointment that comes with mortal love. That's not love, that's just fear of being alone. And what would you know about love?" Elizabeth's voice became cruel. "Your wife left you because you cared more about other people's problems than your own family. You saved strangers and lost the person who mattered most." The words cut deep because they were true. I had worked too many late shifts, missed too many dinners, chosen my job over my marriage until there was nothing left to save. "Maybe I did make mistakes," I said. "But running away won't fix them." "No," Elizabeth agreed. "But crossing over will end the pain of those mistakes, forever." More couples were arriving at the overlook. I could hear their quiet conversations, see them gathering at the edge of Elizabeth's bridge. She was calling to all of them, promising eternal love without risk of loss. I understood now what Elizabeth really was. She wasn't just a ghost, she was the embodiment of romantic obsession, the dark side of love that wants to possess rather than cherish. She had died unable to accept the loss of her fiancé, and now she was trapping others in that same desperate need to avoid the pain of love ending. "You're wrong about love," I told her. "Real love isn't about avoiding pain. It's about choosing to care for someone, even when it hurts. Even when it's difficult." "Pretty words," Elizabeth said. "But you don't believe them, not when your own love failed." She was right. My divorce had left me convinced that maybe lasting love was impossible. Maybe all relationships were doomed to failure and disappointment. But then I thought about the couples I'd saved over the years. People who had come to Lover's Leap ready to die, but who had chosen to live instead. Some of them had worked through their problems. Others had broken up, but found new love with different people. They had faced the risk of heartbreak and chosen to keep trying. That was real courage. Real love. I lit one of the emergency flares and held it high. The bright red light cut through the darkness, revealing the truth about Elizabeth's bridge. It wasn't solid ice after all. It was frozen mist, held together by nothing but supernatural will and the desperate wishes of broken hearts. Love isn't about guarantees, I shouted over the sound of the flare. It's about taking risks. It's about choosing to trust someone even when you might get hurt. Elizabeth's beautiful face twisted with rage. You understand nothing. Love without certainty is meaningless. Better to die together in perfect love than to live and watch it fade. The couples at the edge of the cliff were stirring, looking confused. My words, or maybe the harsh light of the flare, was breaking through Elizabeth's influence. That's not love, one of the women said slowly. That's just being scared. Elizabeth screamed, a sound that shattered ice from the trees around us. Her bridge began to crack and crumble, chunks of frozen mist falling into the gorge below. If I cannot have eternal love, she shrieked, then no one can. The bridge collapsed completely, but Elizabeth didn't fall. She rose up from the gorge like a pillar of freezing wind, her white dress billowing around her, her dark eyes fixed on me with absolute hatred. You have taken away their chance for perfect love, she said. Now you will share my eternal loneliness. She rushed toward me like a winter storm, and I felt her supernatural cold wrap around my heart. All the pain of my divorce, all the loneliness of the years since, came flooding back 100 times stronger. The despair was so crushing I could barely breathe. But I lit another flare, and another, filling the overlook with warm red light. Each one seemed to diminish Elizabeth's power, driving her back toward the cliff edge. Love isn't about avoiding pain, I said, fighting against the supernatural despair she was sending at me. Sometimes love means letting someone go. Sometimes it means accepting that relationships end, but still believing that caring for someone was worth it. Elizabeth's form was becoming less solid, more like mist than flesh. You cannot destroy me, she whispered. As long as people fear losing love, I will exist. Maybe, I said, but tonight, you won't be taking anyone with you. I threw the last flare right at her. She screamed again and dissolved into the wind, leaving only the scent of flowers and the echo of old sadness. The couples at the overlook were fully awake now, looking around in confusion and horror at how close they had come to jumping. One by one, they backed away from the cliff edge and started down the trail to safety. But I knew Elizabeth Mercer wasn't gone for good. She would return whenever hearts were broken and people preferred the fantasy of eternal love to the messy reality of human relationships. I would have to be ready for her. The official report blamed the incidents on unusual weather conditions, creating dangerous accessibility to the overlook area. The Park Service permanently closed the Lover's Leap Trail during winter months, and we installed new safety barriers around the cliff edge. 2 people died that night, Jake and Emma, the couple who jumped before I could reach them. Their bodies were recovered from the gorge 3 days later, when the ice storm finally ended. The families were told it was a tragic accident, young people taking foolish risks during dangerous weather. Maria transferred to a different district a month later. She said she kept having nightmares about bridges made of ice and women in white dresses calling her name. We still write letters sometimes, keeping in touch about unusual suicide cases that might involve supernatural elements. As for me, I stayed at Breaks Interstate Park. Someone needed to watch for Elizabeth's return, and I'd become the unofficial expert on what the Park Service privately called location-specific crisis intervention. The bridgekeeper does come back. Every Valentine's Day, every anniversary of a local tragedy, whenever couples visit Lover's Leap carrying too much heartbreak and too little hope. She's weaker now, more cautious, but she still calls to people who think death is easier than healing. I've saved 17 more couples over the past 3 years since that ice storm. Each time, it's the same pattern. Impossible weather conditions, creating easy access to dangerous areas, voices calling from the gorge below, and the appearance of Elizabeth's ice bridges leading nowhere but down. The truth is, Elizabeth Mercer was right about one thing. I didn't know much about healthy love when I first met her. My marriage had failed because I was too afraid of vulnerability, too focused on being needed rather than being loved. But fighting Elizabeth taught me something important. Love isn't about avoiding the possibility of loss. Real love means caring for someone, even when you know that caring might lead to pain. It means choosing connection over safety, growth over certainty. I started seeing a therapist after that Valentine's night, worked through some of my issues about relationships and trust. Last year, I even started dating again, a woman named Carol who works at the visitor center. We take things slow, both of us, knowing that love involves risk. But I also keep emergency flares in my truck year-round now, and I monitor weather reports for unusual ice formations. The bridge keeper of Lover's Leap is still out there, waiting for the next group of broken hearts to guide toward her eternal solution. If you're ever visiting a romantic overlook during a storm, and you see perfect paths through dangerous terrain, turn around and go home. If you hear voices calling from places no living person could reach, don't follow them. And if a beautiful woman in a white dress offers you a bridge to eternal love, remember that the only love worth having is the kind you have to work for. Some love stories are meant to have endings, but the best ones also have new beginnings. The dead can't teach the living how to love. They can only share their fear of losing it. I've learned to tell the difference. My name is Margaret Caulfield, and I've spent 22 years studying the deadliest predators in West Virginia's mountains. Bears that can crush a man's skull, wildcats that hunt in absolute silence, wild dogs that run in packs and never stop chasing their prey. I thought I knew everything that could kill you in these woods. I was wrong about the mother. People always ask me about my name, Caulfield. My grandmother picked it when she came over from Greece. She said America was built on coal and mountains, so that's what we'd be called. She was right about the coal part, wrong about the mountains being safe. I work for the National Forest Service in the Monongahela Forest, down in the valleys below Seneca Rocks. It's beautiful country. Limestone cliffs that cut straight up into the sky, cave systems that go deeper than anyone's mapped, and forests so thick you can walk for hours without seeing sunlight. It's also 25 miles from the nearest town, with no cell towers and radio that barely works on good days. Most folks know me as the ranger who explains away monster stories. Someone sees a beast kill their livestock, I show them bear tracks. Family swears they heard a demon screaming in the night. I play them recordings of mountain lions. For 2 decades, I've been the voice of science in cryptid country, the woman with a PhD who can explain anything. The locals respect that. They call me Doc Margaret, even though my degree is in animal behavior, not medicine. They trust me because I don't laugh at their stories. I listen, I investigate, and I give them real answers. Sometimes those answers are scarier than their ghost tales. A hungry bear is more dangerous than any made-up monster. But some stories kept coming back. Always the same details, always from people who had no reason to lie. The Seneca tribe has stories about something they called Yahayahesh, the mother beast who steals children when parents break the natural laws. German settlers called it Waldmutter, the forest mother who punishes the greedy. Even now, local mothers warn their kids about the woman in the woods who cries like a baby to lure you close. I filed all of it under folklore. Every culture has boogeyman stories to keep kids from wandering into the wilderness alone. That changed in November 1979. The snow came early that year, and hunting season got canceled because of weather. The forest was empty, except for a few die-hard campers who didn't want to waste their vacation time. One of those families was the Hendersons, mom, dad, and 2 kids, 8 and 10 years old. They were good people. I'd checked their camping permit myself 3 days before. Tom Henderson was a mechanic from Pittsburgh, and his wife Sarah taught 3rd grade. They came to Seneca Rocks every fall for 10 years running. They knew the rules, respected the wildlife, and always left their campsite cleaner than they found it. On November 15th, their RV was found by another camper who got worried when he heard their dog barking for hours straight. The RV was locked from the inside. Windows were too small for even the kids to crawl through. No damage to the doors or walls. Their sleeping bags were still warm. The Henderson family was gone. Not missing, gone. Like they'd vanished into thin air, leaving their German shepherd behind to bark himself hoarse, trying to wake up masters who weren't there anymore. The state police called me in as the local wildlife expert. Standard procedure when people disappear in the mountains is to assume animal attack until proven otherwise. Bears can drag a body for miles. Wildcats are smart enough to separate family members and pick them off one by one. But I'd never seen anything like the Henderson scene, not in 22 years of studying predators. And that poor dog knew something I didn't. He wouldn't stop looking at the tree line and whimpering. Every few minutes, he'd raise his hackles and growl at something I couldn't see. Something that made a trained hunting dog shake like a scared puppy. I should have listened to that dog. Animals know things we don't. They can smell danger that's still miles away, hear sounds that never reach human ears. That German shepherd was trying to warn me about the mother. But I was Margaret Caulfield, the expert who didn't believe in monsters. I was about to learn that some things in these mountains are older and hungrier than any bear. Some things know exactly what human mothers fear most. And some things have been waiting a very long time to teach that lesson. The first thing I noticed wrong was the silence. Real mountain silence isn't quiet at all. It's full of bird calls, squirrel chatter, insects humming, branches creaking in the wind. But the forest around the Henderson campsite felt dead. No sound except that German shepherd's whimpering and the crunch of early snow under my boots. I started with standard procedure. Photo documentation of the scene, measurements of the RV's position, examination of footprints around the site, though the snow had covered most tracks. The dog stayed close to me, pressing against my legs every few steps like he was afraid to be alone. "What happened here, boy?" I whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Where did they go?" He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, then turned toward the tree line and whined. Deep in the woods, something cracked like a heavy branch breaking. The dog immediately pressed closer to me, trembling. Inside the RV, everything looked normal at first glance. Beds made but slept in. Coffee pot half full on the counter. Kids' clothes laid out for the next day. No signs of struggle, no blood, no damage to furniture or walls. But when I looked up at the ceiling, my blood went cold. Claw marks. Deep gouges in the metal, starting near the door and ending directly over the parents' bed. 4 parallel scratches, each one about 18 inches long. Whatever made those marks had been inside the RV with the family. I measured the gouges with my ruler. The span between the outer marks was wider than any bear paw I'd ever seen. The depth meant whatever did this had claws like railroad spikes. And the angle was wrong. These marks came from something tall enough to rake the ceiling while standing upright. But there was no way in or out. I checked every window latch, every door lock, even the roof vents. Everything was secure from the inside. The windows were too small for a grown person to crawl through, and none of them were broken. The door locks worked perfectly. Outside the RV, I set up my equipment. Motion-triggered cameras at 4 points around the campsite. Sound recording equipment to pick up any large animal movement. I even brought my tranquilizer rifle, loaded with enough sedative to drop a 600-pound black bear. The plan was simple. Wait for whatever killed the Hendersons to come back to its hunting ground. Predators almost always return to successful kill sites. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast. I made camp inside the Hendersons' RV, partly for warmth, partly because something felt safer about walls and a locked door. The German shepherd came in with me, settling down by the door like he was standing guard. Around midnight, my first camera triggered, then the second, then the third, then all 4, one after another, like something was walking a perfect circle around the campsite. I grabbed my rifle and night scope, moving to the RV window. Through the scope, I could see my cameras clear as day, their infrared flashes going off every few seconds. But there was nothing there, just empty forest. The dog started growling, low and constant. His eyes were fixed on the window, watching something I couldn't see. That's when I heard it, a sound that made my skin crawl and my hands shake on the rifle. Crying. A child crying somewhere out in the dark woods. High and desperate, like a little girl who was lost and scared, and calling for her mommy. "Help me," the voice called. "Mommy, please help me, I'm so scared." Every maternal instinct I had screamed at me to open that door and run toward the sound. Some little girl was out there alone in the freezing woods, and she needed help. But the rational part of my brain, the part that had studied predators for 22 years, knew better. Mountain lions can imitate human voices. It's one of their hunting strategies. They mimic the sounds of wounded prey to lure other animals into range. But this voice was perfect. Not the rough approximation a wild animal might manage, but the exact words and tone of a terrified child. Complete sentences with proper pronunciation and emotional inflection. "Please," the voice called again, closer now. "I can't find my family. The bad thing took them. Please help me." The dog's growling turned into a full snarl. His hackles were up, and he was backing away from the window like whatever was out there was the most dangerous thing he'd ever encountered. I forced myself to stay put. Protocol for unknown predators was to observe and document, not to engage without backup. But that crying went on for almost an hour, moving in a slow circle around the RV. Sometimes it sounded like a little girl, sometimes like a boy. Once, it perfectly mimicked a woman calling, "Margaret, Margaret, come help us." Nobody outside my immediate supervisor knew I was here. Nobody knew my name. When morning came, I checked my cameras. 4 hours of footage from 4 different angles. Every single frame showed empty forest. But the audio track picked up something my cameras couldn't see. Footsteps, heavy ones, walking upright through the snow. And underneath the crying, something else. A low rumbling sound like a large animal breathing. But the breathing was wrong, too slow, too deep, too deliberate. Like something very big was trying to breathe very quietly. I called for backup that morning. Detective Roy Hatfield from the state police, along with his K-9 unit. Roy was good people. A former Marine with 20 years of experience in missing persons cases. His dog, Rex, was trained to track human scent over impossible terrain. When they arrived that afternoon, Rex took one sniff around the campsite and refused to work. He'd track a scent trail right up to a specific creek about 50 yards from the RV, then stop dead and whine. Roy tried everything. Different commands, food rewards, even dragging the dog across the creek. Rex would rather face punishment than cross that water. "Never seen him do this," Roy muttered, pulling Rex back from the creek bank. "He's tracked murder suspects through swamps and blizzards. Something's got him spooked bad. Something's got me spooked too," I admitted, showing him the photos of the ceiling scratches. "Roy, what kind of animal can make marks like this while standing inside an 8-foot-tall RV?" He studied the pictures for a long time. "You sure this wasn't done with a tool? Like someone broke in and staged this?" No signs of forced entry. "And look at the depth. These gouges go through the metal into the insulation underneath. Whatever did this had serious strength." That night, Roy agreed to help me stake out the campsite. 2 armed professionals with military training and police experience. We figured we could handle whatever mountain predator was claiming this territory. We figured wrong. Around 2 a.m., Roy's radio crackled with static. Then, clear as day, his own voice came through the speaker. "Base, this is Hatfield. We've got multiple casualties at Seneca Rocks campsite. Need immediate medical evacuation and body bags." The thing got them all. Roy grabbed the radio. "Base, disregard that transmission. This is Hatfield, and we're both fine. Someone's playing games on our frequency." But the voice came back, still sounding exactly like Roy. "Margaret's dead. I'm wounded but mobile. The creature is 12 feet tall and moving toward Route 33. Set up roadblocks and keep civilians away." "That's not me," Roy whispered, staring at the radio. "That's my voice, but I'm not saying those words." I felt ice in my veins that had nothing to do with the November cold. Something out there could perfectly imitate not just crying children, but adult voices. Something that knew our names and our equipment. Something that was smart enough to lie. The third night, the mother got bolder. Roy had called in additional backup, 2 more state troopers and a Forest Service investigator with specialized tracking equipment. We set up a proper command post with generators, floodlights, and radio equipment that couldn't be easily jammed or imitated. "Whatever's out there," Roy announced to the group, "it's not a normal predator. Normal animals avoid humans, especially groups of armed humans. This thing is actively hunting us." I'd spent the day researching historical records at the county library. What I found made my hands shake as I read. 1,923. Entire mining camp near Seneca Rocks, abandoned after 23 workers disappeared over 6 weeks. Survivors reported a she-demon that could mimic human voices and walked upright like a woman. 1,945. Family of 5 vanished from their cabin. Neighbors heard the father's voice calling for help for 3 straight days after finding the empty cabin. When searchers arrived, they found the cabin torn apart from the inside. 1963. Hunting party of 4 men disappeared. Their truck was found with claw marks on the roof, and their hunting dogs cowering inside, refusing to come out. Every incident shared the same details: perfect vocal mimicry, impossible claw marks, and no bodies ever recovered. "So what are we dealing with?" asked Trooper Williams, the youngest of our group. "Some kind of bear that learned to talk?" "Bears don't hunt humans systematically," I replied, "and they don't use psychological warfare. This thing is displaying complex intelligence and long-term planning." "You're talking about it like it's human," said Trooper Barnes. "I'm talking about it like it's a very smart predator that's been perfecting its hunting strategy for decades." That's when my portable radio crackled to life with my own voice. "Hello, Margaret. We need to talk." Everyone went silent. I wasn't touching the radio. My mouth wasn't moving, but my voice continued, speaking through the static. "You've been studying me for 3 days now, taking pictures, setting traps, bringing more hunters. But you don't understand what I am, do you?" Roy drew his weapon and motioned for everyone to spread out. Standard tactical response to an unknown threat. My voice on the radio laughed, a sound I'd never made in my life. "You think your guns will stop me? Your tranquilizer darts? I've been eating your kind since before your grandparents were born." "Margaret," Roy whispered, "you're not saying this, right?" I shook my head, unable to speak. Hearing my own voice say those words was like listening to my evil twin from another dimension. "I know what you're thinking. Margaret," my radio voice continued, "you're wondering how I learned to speak like you. The answer is simple. I listen while I feed. Human vocal cords make such interesting sounds when they're torn just right." Trooper Williams vomited into the snow. Barnes started praying under his breath. "But I don't want to eat you, Margaret. You're special. You study predators. You understand hunting. You'd make an excellent mother for my young." The radio went silent. In the distance, something that might have been wind or might have been breathing moved through the trees. "Pack it up," Roy ordered. "We're moving back to the road. This thing is playing with us." But as we started gathering equipment, my motion cameras began triggering again. All 6 of them, in sequence, like something was deliberately walking from camera to camera, posing for pictures. "It's showing off," I realized. "It wants us to know it can trigger our equipment whenever it wants." Then Trooper Williams screamed. He was maybe 10 feet from the rest of us, coiling up a cable, when something grabbed him from behind and dragged him into the trees. It happened so fast that all we saw was Williams there 1 second, gone the next, and broken branches where he'd been pulled through the underbrush. We followed his trail with flashlights and weapons drawn. The drag marks in the snow were clear enough. Something very large and very strong had hauled a full-grown man through the forest like he weighed nothing. The trail ended at the mouth of a limestone cave about a quarter-mile from our campsite. Williams' equipment was scattered around the entrance, his radio, his weapon, his jacket, but no Williams. "Dave," Roy called into the cave. "Dave, can you hear me?" An answer came back immediately. "I'm okay. I'm down here, but I can't climb out. There's no sign of whatever grabbed me." Roy looked at me with questions in his eyes. "That's Dave's voice," he whispered. "But something's wrong with it." I listened more carefully. The voice was perfect. William's accent, his speech patterns, even his habit of clearing his throat between sentences. But the content was wrong. "Bring rope," the Williams voice called. "I'm about 50 feet down, no injuries, just stuck." "Dave," Roy called back. "What's your wife's name?" Long pause. Then, "Sarah." Roy's face went white. "Dave's not married. Never has been." We backed away from the cave entrance as fast as we could move. Behind us, the Williams voice started laughing. First his normal laugh, then something else entirely. Something that sounded like an animal trying to learn how laughter worked. "Wait," the voice called, changing tone. "Don't leave me down here, please. It's so dark. I think something's wrong with my head. I can't remember things right." Roy grabbed my arm. That could be the real Dave. Head trauma can cause confusion. But I was studying the cave mouth with my flashlight. Around the entrance, carved into the soft limestone, were symbols I'd seen in my research. Spirals and circles that matched Native American warnings about places where the spirit world touched the physical world. And scattered around those symbols, like offerings to a shrine, were small piles of human bones. "Roy," I whispered, "we need to get out of here, right now. I can't leave a man behind. That's not a man down there anymore." As if to prove my point, the Williams voice called out again. "Come down here, Margaret. I found something you need to see. Evidence about the Henderson family. They're alive down here." Every instinct I had screamed that this was a trap. But the possibility that the Hendersons might be alive, might have survived for 4 days in that cave system. "Margaret, no," Roy said as I stepped toward the cave entrance. "Don't you see what it's doing? It's using our compassion against us." He was right. But the voice that answered him wasn't Williams anymore. It was Tom Henderson, the father from the missing family. "Margaret, thank God you found us. Sarah's hurt bad, and the kids are scared. We've been hiding down here from the thing that attacked our RV." Then Sarah Henderson's voice joined in. "Please help us. We don't know how to get out. The children are so cold." Then the little girl. "Mommy's bleeding. Please come help Mommy." Then the little boy. "I want to go home. I want my dog." 4 perfect voices, calling for help. 4 family members I'd been searching for. Either the Hendersons were alive and needed rescue, or something had learned to perfectly imitate their voices by listening to them die. Roy made the decision for me. He fired his service weapon 3 times into the cave mouth, the gunshots echoing off stone walls like thunder. All the voices stopped at once. In the sudden silence, we heard something else, something moving deeper in the cave system, heavy footsteps on stone. And underneath that, a new sound that made my skin crawl, humming. A woman's voice humming a lullaby, like a mother trying to comfort her children. We ran. We made it back to the vehicles, but Roy's radio was already crackling with reports of new problems. 2 more families had disappeared from campsites 20 miles away, both RVs found locked from the inside, both with the same impossible claw marks on the ceilings. "It's spreading," I told Roy as we packed emergency supplies. "Or there's more than one of them. What the hell are we dealing with, Margaret? This isn't in any manual they ever gave me." I pulled out my research notes from the county library. According to Cherokee oral tradition, Yahiahash was a female entity that fed on human families. But she didn't just eat them, she used them to breed. The stories say she could implant her young in human women, creating hybrids that looked normal until they matured. You're talking about a breeding program. A very old one. The mining camp records from 1923 mention autopsies on recovered victims. The coroner noted unusual physiological changes in the women. Enlarged reproductive organs, modified bone structure around the pelvis, abnormal hormone levels. Roy stared at me. "You think this thing has been abducting people to use as incubators?" "I think it's been perfecting a survival strategy for a very long time. Create offspring that can pass for human until they're old enough to hunt on their own." That's when Detective Barnes came running from the tree line, his face pale with terror. "Guys, we've got a problem." I found Williams. He led us to a clearing about 100 yards from the cave entrance. What we found there will haunt me for the rest of my life. Williams was alive, technically, but he'd been changed. He was suspended about 10 feet off the ground in what looked like a cocoon made from organic material. Part spiderweb, part bird nest, part something I didn't want to identify. His arms and legs were bound with the same material, but his head was free. He was conscious and aware. "Oh God," he whispered when he saw us. "Thank God you found me. You have to cut me down. You have to get me out of here." But as I looked closer, I saw the changes. His skin had a waxy, translucent quality, like he was being preserved rather than just restrained. His eyes were bloodshot and dilated. And his abdomen was swollen like he was pregnant. "Dave," Roy called, "we're going to get you down. Just stay calm." "No," Williams replied, and his voice was different now, deeper, more guttural. "Don't come closer. Something's wrong with me. I can feel it moving inside." As he spoke, something shifted under the skin of his belly, something with claws. "Jesus Christ," Barnes whispered, backing away. "What did it do to him?" Williams looked down at his own body with horror. "It put something in me. I can feel it growing. It's been feeding on me from the inside, and now it's ready to come out." The organic cocoon around him started twitching. Williams screamed, not in his own voice, but in something that sounded like an animal in pain. We have to help him, Roy said, raising his knife to cut the binding material. No, I grabbed his arm. Roy, look at his eyes, really look. William's pupils were changing shape. Instead of round, they were becoming vertical slits like a cat's. And when he opened his mouth to scream again, I saw that his teeth had been replaced with rows of sharp, pointed fangs. It's not just implanting offspring, I realized. It's transforming the host, changing their biology to support the hybrid young. Williams looked directly at me with those changed eyes. Margaret, he said in his own voice, though it was getting harder to understand through his modified throat. Kill me, please. Before it finishes changing me. That's when the cocoon split open and something crawled out. It was about the size of a human infant, but wrong in every possible way. Pale, hairless skin that looked too thin. Limbs that were too long and jointed in places they shouldn't be. A face that might have been human if you squinted, but with a mouth full of needle teeth and eyes that reflected light like an animal's. The thing looked around with obvious intelligence, then focused on me and opened its mouth. What came out was my voice. Hello, Mommy. Williams collapsed as soon as the creature emerged, his body drained and lifeless. The hybrid offspring crawled down from the tree with surprising speed and agility. It's learning, I whispered. It heard my voice, and it's already mimicking me. Roy raised his weapon, but I stopped him. Don't shoot it here. We need to understand what we're dealing with. That was a mistake. The creature tilted its head at the sound of my voice, then made the same sound back at me with perfect accuracy. Don't shoot it here. We need to understand what we're dealing with. But it was learning more than just words. It was learning context. It looked at Roy's gun, then at Barnes, then back at me. Roy, it said in my voice, kill Barnes. He's been infected too. What? Barnes spun around in confusion. Don't listen to it, I said quickly. It's trying to turn us against each other. But the creature was already adapting its strategy. It made a sound like crying, not mimicking a human child this time, but crying the way a real infant would cry when it's hungry and scared. Every maternal instinct I'd ever felt kicked in immediately. Looking at this thing, I didn't see a monster anymore. I saw a baby that needed protection and care. My hands actually started reaching toward it before I caught myself. It's using pheromones, I said through gritted teeth, fighting the urge to pick up the creature. Some kind of chemical signal that triggers protective instincts. Roy was struggling with the same response. His gun hand was shaking as he fought between training and biochemistry. We have to get out of here, I managed, before it affects our judgment too much. But as we started backing away, we heard the sound we'd been dreading. Heavy footsteps approaching through the trees. The mother was coming for her offspring. When she emerged from the forest, I finally understood what we'd been hunting. She was 12 feet tall and built like a nightmare version of a human woman. Broad hips, prominent breasts, features that might have been beautiful if they weren't attached to something designed to kill. Her skin was pale and hairless, stretched tight over muscles that moved like steel cables. Her hands ended in claws that could tear through metal. But the worst part was her eyes. They held intelligence. Not animal cunning, but genuine thought. She looked at her offspring, then at us, and I could see her calculating the best way to protect one while eliminating the other. Hello, Margaret, she said in my voice. Thank you for taking such good care of my child. The baby creature crawled quickly across the ground to its mother, who scooped it up with surprising gentleness. You've seen how quickly my young develop, the mother continued, still speaking in my voice, but with better grammar than the infant had managed. In a few hours, this one will be as large as a human teenager. In a few days, fully mature. All it needs is proper nutrition. She looked meaningfully at Roy and Barnes. You want to feed it, my men, I said. I want you to help me feed it, she corrected. You're a wildlife expert, Margaret. You understand that mothers do anything to protect their young. Join me, and I'll make you a better mother than you ever dreamed possible. As she spoke, I felt something changing in my body chemistry. The same maternal pull I'd felt toward the infant, but stronger. I looked at this creature and saw not a monster, but a fellow mother trying to protect her child. Part of my mind knew this was manipulation, but a deeper part, the part that evolution had programmed to respond to maternal signals, was screaming at me to help her. Margaret, Roy warned, whatever you're feeling, fight it. But I was already stepping forward. What saved me wasn't training or intelligence or willpower. It was my emergency bear spray. When I realized I was about to surrender to a creature that had killed an entire family, muscle memory from 22 years of fieldwork kicked in. I pulled the canister from my belt and emptied the entire contents into the mother's face from 6 feet away. Concentrated capsaicin, designed to stop a charging grizzly, hit her respiratory system like liquid fire. She dropped her offspring and staggered backward, clawing at her eyes and throat. The chemical bond she'd been weaving around my mind snapped like a broken wire. "Run!" I screamed to Roy and Barnes. Roy grabbed my arm, and we sprinted toward the vehicles while the mother's inhuman screaming echoed through the forest behind us. The baby creature's cries joined hers, but its voice was still my voice, which made the sound even more horrible. We made it to Roy's patrol car, and he gunned the engine, spinning the tires in snow as we accelerated toward Route 33. In the rearview mirror, I saw the mother emerge from the trees, still affected by the bear spray but moving with frightening speed. "She's following us," I said. "Can't outrun something like that on these mountain roads," Roy replied. "We need backup." He radioed for every available unit to converge on our location, but I was already thinking beyond immediate survival. If the mother had been breeding hybrids for decades, how many were out there? How many had already matured and integrated into human society? We reached the main highway and kept driving until we found the state police roadblock Roy had requested. Behind us, the forest had gone silent again. Federal agents arrived within 6 hours. Men in black suits who claimed to be from Fish and Wildlife but carried equipment I'd never seen before. They set up a perimeter around the entire Seneca Rocks area and classified everything that had happened as a natural gas explosion. They confiscated my research, my photographs, my audio recordings. Officially, everything was destroyed. Unofficially, I suspect it went into files that most people will never see. They offered me a transfer to a desk job in Charleston with a significant salary increase and a pension that would set me up for life. All I had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement and forget everything that happened in those November woods. I signed. But I didn't forget. 20 years later, I monitor missing persons reports throughout Appalachian region. I track birth records in counties where unexplained disappearances occurred 9 months earlier. I watch for children with unusual growth patterns or behavioral abnormalities. The patterns are still there. Families disappearing from locked houses, voices calling for help in empty forests. Children born with extraordinary intelligence and appetites their parents can't satisfy. The mother survived that night in 1979. The seismic equipment in the area registers unusual activity every few months. Movement in the deep cave systems, where something large walks through tunnels that don't appear on any geological survey. And sometimes, late at night when I'm reading reports of new disappearances, my phone rings. The caller ID always shows my own number. When I answer, I hear my own voice, older now but unmistakably mine, saying, "Hello, Margaret. Are you ready to be a mother yet?" I never answer anymore, but she keeps calling. If you're planning to camp in Appalachian wilderness, remember this. If you hear children crying in the dark, don't investigate. If you hear voices calling your name from empty forest, don't respond. And if you're a woman traveling alone, stay away from caves and areas where local mothers warn their children not to play. The mother is still out there, still breeding, still expanding her territory. She's patient, she's intelligent, and she knows that every human female carries the biological programming that makes us respond to the sound of a child in distress. That's her greatest weapon. And our greatest weakness, sweet dreams.